Ah. Bum 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 dun 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 dun. Having one of those days where I woke up tired, and I'm just tired. You know what I'm talking about? You know how that happens sometimes, where you're just like, you wake up and you're like, oh, I had a nice sleep, solid sleep, had some cool dreams, even some nice stuff. And then I just was tired, and I'm still tired. I went out for half price wings. It's Wednesday. Wednesday is half price wings day. And I'm just flipping exhausted. And I can't shake it. Nothing I do, cup of coffee, nothing's working. So this stream is gonna be me as like sleepy as it gets. I'm literally gonna like say goodbye at the end of the stream, hit exit, and just go to sleep. Like today, I might as well have just slept through today, for all it mattered. I don't know what it is. Just sometimes the universe likes to hand that out to you, where they're like, "Oh, you drank enough water, you had enough food, yeah, good, everything's great, looks good. Yep, you're just sleepy. You're just gonna be a sleepy butt today." Okay, well, thanks, universe. Thanks so much. Looks like the Boeing whistleblower story is not going anywhere. I think it's nice that we live in this era where one of the great things that the internet has definitely done is that it's finally expanded people's consciousness. Gabriel, good to see you. It's finally expanded people's consciousness, or finally there's enough evidence that's easily available and readily available that people are like it used to be the case that in the 70s, the 60s and 70s, there's this like trope, right? The trope of the guy being like, it's the CIA, man, and like the tinfoil hat conspiracy theory kind of thing. That everybody was like, yeah, what a kooky, haha, what do you mean the CIA? And now it's like, if you tried to convince somebody that the CIA, like referencing the CIA as conspiratorial, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, we literally have their confessions. We have straight out investigations on these people, like from the United States State Department, from the Congress. Like, what are you talking about? And because things have gotten so obvious, and because the information is so easy to get, certainly easier than it used to be, like you don't need to go through these gatekeepers anymore. uh, Independent journalists and independent sources are willing to talk about these things more openly. It has become easier to encounter this stuff in the first place. For example, this Boeing whistleblower who's clearly got assassinated by Boeing. Like, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, right? This is not financial advice, but come on, like so very clear that Boeing killed this guy, right? To shut him up, to make it so that he couldn't put in his testimony, all of this kind of stuff. The normal reason why a big, massive conglomerate corporation would kill someone. Uh, uh, and we're actually finding out about it and hearing about it like as it's essentially happening. It's a stark difference from how it would used to be, where you'd have to go through like a big there'd be a journalistic report, and that would get published like page 53, article 2, segment 53. It would be buried in an article somewhere, and then so someone else would have to bring it to the fore and bring it up, and it would just get heard about in certain circles. And then when you would bring it up, people would be like, that sounds like crazy conspiracy commie talk. Well, it's just getting obvious now, right? It's just like getting completely obvious that this is what the system of capital is, and this is how it's going to act as this whole thing starts to come apart. And using the Boeing story is perfect because these planes are literally coming apart, right? Like the planes are coming apart in midair. And that's not where you want these planes to come apart, right? That's the last place you want a Boeing like 747 to come apart. You want them to come apart on the ground. And you are starting to see, like, I've seen John Oliver talking about this. I've seen Jon Stewart mention this. I've seen more credible voices in the conversation with larger audiences start talking about this, yet to see anybody actually talk about the fact that Boeing assassinated this guy, right? Which is like pretty clearly what happened here. It's pretty like who else would be responsible for this? And it does sort of beg the question, is there actually going to be an investigation into this? Like one of the things I always think about when these obvious political assassinations happen is like, is there anybody in the system of power that's like, so we think it's Boeing that did this, right? Like we should investigate this under the assumption that Boeing is the one that's responsible for doing this, right? Like it just seems like I never hear anybody actually saying that. Like when they killed Jeffrey Epstein, for example, the entire system of power was like, yeah, it's a suicide, all right. Man, what a clear-cut, open and shut suicide. Nothing strange about this, right? And like, was there anybody within the system of power that was like, no, so this guy just got killed, right? Like, we should probably investigate the warden, right? Investigate the guards. Like, we should probably like have a pretty heavy and significant investigation into this, assuming it's a murder, right? We should just assume that it's a murder. It just seems to never happen. Like it's just so clear that people who are within the system of power are so within the thrall of the system of power that the assumption is just keep your mouth shut. And it's kind of like basic survival strategy, I think. It's just basic survivor, right? Just keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, right? It's not your job to ask questions. It's not what you're there for. Your job's not to do anything. You want to keep getting your paycheck. You want to keep your position, right? You want to keep ascending. Just keep your mouth shut, right? You don't even need to question anything. You don't even need to have any skepticism, right? Just everything is fine and everything is normal. Just keep it going. And it seems to be how the whole system is perpetuating itself, that we're just keeping our heads down, not saying anything. And it seems as though now platforms that are allowing people to coalesce and allowing people to organize and allowing people to know more about what's going on are going to get shut down. We have the TikTok ban, just got passed by Congress, right? As a content creator myself, and as somebody who is attempting to get back onto TikTok after my account got banned off TikTok, I'm looking at that being like, yeah, like TikTok is a very popular platform that is helping people spread the news around at a much more rapid pace, and people are able to connect not just what would be legacy corporate sources, but average everyday citizens are able to get listened to in a way that they couldn't get listened to before. And so this has become a very clear threat to the system of power that requires gatekeeping. It requires people to not pay any attention. Yeah, Boeing is a weapons contractor. I think the U.S. military should reconsider their suppliers. I think the U.S. military, like, the U.S. military knows exactly what it's doing, and it knows exactly what its goals are, right? And I don't think that they're concerned about this. Like, the United States military does not give two shits about the population of America outside of their compliance to its goals. Like, pretty straightforwardly, in my view. Eggs D, good to see you. It wouldn't be too crazy to assume the capitalists regularly read Marx, would it? Of course not, for the same reasons as us. Not for the same reasons as us. Yeah, they're reading Marx with the assumption that this is what our enemy thinks. And this is how our enemy discusses these things. And this is how the enemy wants to know stuff, right? So, but here's the thing, right? Just Me, good to see you. Midnight Rose, good to see you. Isaac, good to see you. If you are an ideologue, if you're a religious fundamentalist, then you read everything as a religious fundamentalist. Like, when I was a religious fundamentalist reading the Bible, I would read other religious tracts, but I would read it as a fundamentalist. And so I would read it as this is what the heathens believe, right? Kind of perspective. and I would be reading it as a like I need to find out a way how to dunk the libs kind of thing. You're not reading it as something that is to be taken seriously and to stand up on its own merits. And so you can't actually get anything from it, right? Like if you read a physics textbook, right? If you read calculus or mathematics, but you were very strictly a religious ideologue that believed that mathematics was a religious ideology, you would never be able to use mathematics, right? Because you are very strictly from the very bottom of the conversation misunderstanding the subject. And I think that's more or less the truth, that there are people, and admittedly, there are United States military personnel and who have, they claim anyway, to have read Marx. Well, they can't actually understand the subject because they're not reading it with the intent to understand it. They're reading it as a fundamentalist religious ideology, which is all they can do. Yeah, TikTok is dangerous, not under the control for sure. Hello to you, just me. Midnight Rose writes, "Hey John, hope you've been doing well. I'm very sleepy right now, man. I'm in a sleepy day. I don't know what's going on. Just super like I've got one foot in the dream world right now. Been a while since I popped in, just busy with my new job. Yeah, I suspect so. The TikTok ban is pure delusion. A nursing home is actually running our country. Yeah. I mean, I am more or less of the opinion, you know, like history is laden with the realities of a military taking over a country, right? Like that's usually how it goes. That you have what's considered a democratic system, but eventually the military just goes, "We're going to take this over," right? And that's the most common thing to happen, and I think it's already happened. That the electoral system that exists is performative, primarily performative. I think that there might be some people within it who actually, they're well-meaning, you know, they're trying to get a message across, and who knows, maybe they will get that 0.2 increase over 10 years legislation passed through, right? But like, and like, but the people who are actually in charge are obviously the military, right? Like everybody's operating on behalf of the military. Like United States generals have more power and influence in what's going on in the United States than the president, like without a doubt. Like who's getting more funding, right? Like sure, the president could go off the cuff and start doing all kinds of stuff, but he's not going to, right? Because the military is in control. And the military doesn't give a fuck about what goes on in civilian flights, and the military doesn't give a fuck about any of this. Like the military operates for its own rationale and its own purposes and its own reasons. It doesn't care about the needs of the public, right? In fact, there's an argument to be made from the military perspective that the worse things are for the civilian population, the better it will be for the military, because more people will want to enlist in the military. If the only way out of this system of grinding poverty that we've systemically created is military service, well, there you have it, right? And like for all of our talk about how like corporate power and all this kind of stuff, well, who's got all the money? Where does all your tax dollars go in the United States? It goes into the United States military. So who's in charge? Like who's in charge? Yet the Jewish lobby was caught on a leaked phone call advocating for the TikTok ban. Yeah, I've seen quite a few leaks. I had a video just the other day that I didn't actually end up playing, but it was just straight up they're admitting that TikTok is creating the exact well, not the exact quote, but the idea was this fellow was really trying to affirm to people that this is not a left-right issue anymore. This isn't a left-right issue. That it is a young versus old issue. That the younger you are, i.e., the more you use social media systems, and the less you trust corporate legacy media, the better informed you are about what's actually going on, right? And that's a real problem. Like, what we're watching is very akin to the creation of the printing press, right? Like, they tried to ban the printing press. They created a printing press, and people started printing things and started sending information around, and people started to actually look and be like, oh yeah, like, hey, wait a minute. So people started to question systems of power, and so they started to ban the printing press. Okay, well, I think the genie's out of the bottle, right? That if you ban TikTok, like, the people who are creating this content and the people who are doing this stuff are not going to go away. They're just going to find a new system and a new way and a new connection. And I actually think one of the things that I think is actually like unforeseen is, like, if I think about for myself, like, if they shut the internet down, let's say, if they ban the internet, well, where's a guy like me going to go? Well, I'm going to start organizing locally. It might actually be better for us if people started organizing locally and started and stopped doing these sorts of things and started actually getting into their local and so all of this latent energy that we have, instead of us pouring it out on the internet, we started to actually coalesce locally and started to gain local force. I think that would be a big problem for the system of power. Uh, um, but they've lost control of a lot of stuff. Like, they've lost control of the propaganda narrative. They've lost control of the system that they are supposed to be managing. They no longer have credibility. I think that's the big thing. Like, these institutions are no longer credible. And people have every reason to look at them and be like, why? We don't believe what you have to say, just on the face of it. We don't need to just believe you because you said so. And that's a significant shift in the way people interact with their media. Is that it used to be the case that if, like, the New York Times said it, you could be like, oh, the New York Times said it, okay, so therefore it's been vetted and that's true, right? Well, now that's completely false. So the New York Times said it, who cares? What's their source? Oh, their source is the CIA. Okay. Well, we definitely don't need to believe what they have to say. And that's a significant shift. Yeah, Americans need anything. Congress takes forever to act, if they act at all. Yeah, Jewish lobby makes a demand and the Congress jumps. Yeah, because, like, it's not about the Jewish lobby, right? Like, the Jewish lobby is essentially an arm of the military-industrial complex, right? Like, that Israel is a military base, and Israel is an important wing in the military-industrial complex. Like, no one wants to discuss, and nobody does discuss, the military in this fashion. That it seems that, like, the military-industrial complex is like this amorphous nothing. Like, it exists and doesn't exist in the minds of people. Like, Israel isn't a nation, it's a military base. And that's all it is. So it's not anything other than that. And the Israeli lobby is not like a nationalist organization that's operating on behalf of the people of Israel. They're military contractors. That's who they are exclusively. And they are there as military contractors on behalf of the military-industrial complex to ensure that the military base that they have in the Middle East is well supported and will always be supported. That's their job and that's their role, and that's all they are. Right? Everything else is just trapping. Everything else is just like a window dressing, right? Or incidental. It's just incidental that these people are of Israeli descent. It's incidental that the narrative surrounding them is of this Israeli thing. They're a military base and they're a military organization. They're trained to be Spartans. They're trained to believe in their own supremacy, right? They're trained to have this militant supremacist worldview, and they do. And so when the Israeli lobby goes to lobby the United States government, they're doing so on behalf of the United States military. And I think that that's well understood. I think that's the reason why nobody is going to stand up against the Israeli lobby, right? Like if it was like the Yemen lobby, nobody would give a shit, right? Because it's like the Yemenis don't have direct connection to the United States military in the way that the Israeli lobby does. About the TikTok thing, this is convincing me to go from being critical of the notion of free speech to going, I guess, kind of speech nihilist. I mean, the notion of free speech, like, if the TikTok ban is to occur, we can just sort of do away with the idea that America believes in free speech at all, or that it even cares about its own constitution. Like it's sort of charming to think that a country that believes in free speech is banning platforms because of the Chinese and the Chinese government, even though TikTok is owned by a California system and is literally like a CIA asset. Like they just lost control of it. That's all. Like that's the problem. Is that it's not about the Chinese. It's not about anything. It's just a tool that they've lost control of, and they don't know how to rein it back in. Like they don't know what to do. I think that's the big thing. Like they literally do not know what to do, and they've gone through so many different ways of iterating censorship on the app. Like they've cleaned out any communist symbolism gets you immediately banned. Communist rhetoric will get you flagged, at the very least, shadow banned, and then probably banned. Like you're allowed to be critical, right? But it's got to be within this kind of liberal paradigm, and you've got to be very specific, and you've got to be sourcing things and all of this. But they've still lost control, right? Because things have gotten too obvious. And so they can't, like, what the East Palestine catastrophe, right? Like, that was TikTok. That's the reason we all know about it, is because of TikTok. So it's one of these things where we're all, yeah, you get banned on TikTok for making fun of Nazis, exactly, right? A new system won't have to crop up because the existing social media like Twitter or X and the YouTube Shorts, IG are already cesspools or a joke. So I don't know where they would go. Yeah, who's to say? I'm more or less of the opinion that if you make it so that the social media systems become unusable or ineffective, then people are just going to begin organizing locally, right? Which is where we should be organizing anyway. So it's like we had this little breakthrough moment as a people where we all simultaneously saw that it was fraudulent. We admitted to one another collectively that it's fraudulent. We see that the people who are defending the system are psychos. In very clear, clean ways, they are psychopathic. And now they're going to ban the systems to make it so that we can't even interact with them. So we're going to take all that energy and we're going to begin organizing locally, where it might actually be more effective. Like, the system of capital is going to destroy itself, and it is destroying itself, and it can't help but destroy itself because it's incredibly short-sighted. It's incredibly selfish, and it doesn't know what to do. So it's just going to start doing this dumbass shit. Like, banning TikTok is the most dumbass shit that a person could do. Like, if the system of capital was being run by people who had even an iota of competency whatsoever, it would be doing minor reforms in order to make sure that the people who are the most bought into the system of capital would continue being rewarded for being bought in. But they've stopped doing that. Even the people who are sacrificing their lives to the system of capital are now basically being told, go fuck yourself. So the system has collapsed. It's a rotting corpse, and there's nobody within the system at all that's even interested in doing the most basic, easiest possible reforms. Instead, they're going to do TikTok bans and send another $10 billion to a genocide, right? That's what they're actually doing. Yeah, AIPAC was bragging that every Democrat they backed won their primary. How is this not foreign interference? I mean, AIPAC is part of the military-industrial complex. Like, Israel is Israel's not a foreign entity. Like, it's a military base for the United States government. Last WF meeting was about rebuilding trust, so they know and will likely work on it going forward. Who knows how? Yeah, right, but building trust. Like, how would a psychopath go about building trust? Right? Like a fucking psychopath. And it's going to be transparent, because they're not going to know how to do it, right? Because they don't have empathy. They lack vision. They lack the ability to understand the subject. They're religious fanatics. And so they're going to act like psychos. And they're going to start doing stuff that's going to make them look like fucking total psychopaths. And like, what could they do to rebuild trust? Give people money and houses. Like, stabilize your economies. Give people access to basic goods. Like, basic fucking things. Get rid of the homelessness in your society. Right? Start doing extremely basic shit. Like in a kindergarten way of like, gotta pick up the garbage and put it in the garbage bin. That's not what they're going to do, though. To them, it's just, this is just a big branding exercise. To them, this is just about sending, what we've got to find a new way to propagandize the plebs so that they think that what they're experiencing is normal. Instead of them saying, okay, what these people are experiencing is not normal. And it is rational for people who are experiencing this not normal situation to act in the way that they are acting. And we have to change what we're doing. We have to actually give people access to homes, give people access to food, give people access to water, give people access to the base necessities of their life, right? Maybe even, hey, crazy thought, give them access to things like healthcare, give them access to more leisure time, right? Maybe we should actually want to build a civil society that's actually stable, right? But that's not what they're going to do. They're just going to find a new mascot. And they're just going to try to convince you, like, haha, cereal for dinner, haha. That's what these people are going to do because they're psychopaths and they can't help themselves, right? They're disconnected. They don't understand the subject. They don't understand the lived experience of what's going on in the world, nor are they interested in seriously listening to people who do understand what's going on in the world. All they understand is more money, me good. So how do we make it so that the plebs will go along with that? That's it. So it's going to be a catastrophe for them. They're going to go full mask off. Like, they're going to release propaganda like the Caitlyn Jenner Pepsi commercial, right? They're going to release propaganda video after propaganda video after propaganda video that's just going to get more and more and more and more psychopathic. And they're going to look like psychopaths while they do it. Because they are, and they can't help themselves. So that's their rebuilding trust, right? That's what that means. Content says, which is to say my attitude and expectations have been thoroughly altered all over this TikTok stuff. I mean, it's possible it doesn't happen, right? It's possible that they go to the edge and then they pull themselves down. It's possible. We'll see, right? But if a TikTok ban does happen, then we don't need to pretend like the United States believes in free speech. Like, we don't need to believe in that. And if somebody comes in here and starts talking like, oh, under communism, what are you talking about? You just did a TikTok ban. Like, what are you talking about? Free speech. What an embarrassing thing to say. Midnight asks, by the way, did you see the State of the Union address Biden did? Yes, I did. He said some pretty atrocious shit about immigrants to pander to Republicans. Not surprising, any of us, but nobody's talking about it. Yeah, I mean, look, you guys know my position. The Democrats and the Republicans are allies, right? They work together to maintain the system of capital. And that's all they're ever going to do. And the system of capital is not going to talk about that. Right? They're not going to address that obvious, very frank reality that's clearly in front of us. Like, they're not going to bring up, because to them, the game has to be maintained. That if everybody suddenly realized that Democrats and Republicans are natural allies that work together to maintain the system of capital, like, they would stop supporting the system. So you got to pretend like the game is real and that Biden is not just a fucking Republican, even though he very obviously is. Eggs D writes, random thought, Game of Thrones was anti-working class propaganda. It portrayed poor people as dirty, dingy rapists, while, of course, having you simp for literal aristocratic psychopaths. And not to mention, like incest porn and, like pedophilia shit, too. Yeah, Game of Thrones definitely does have a, like, you're supposed to really love monarchical rule, and like you're supposed to really be like, oh, he was ordained by the prophecy, like okay. It's all very like divine right of kings thinking. But I mean, like, I love that Game of Thrones, like, what's so funny about Game of Thrones is that it is exactly the poster child for how capitalism will betray you. That they started with something that was just a good popular story that everybody liked, and then they betrayed everybody for money, right? Like that, and they destroyed their own legacy. Like, nobody gives a shit about Game of Thrones anymore. Nobody's going to do like a big Game of Thrones rewatch. Like, that's not going to happen. They destroyed it. Right? Just like and they can't help themselves anymore because, again, they're psychopaths. So they don't understand why things are popular. They don't understand humanity. They don't understand why people like people. They don't understand why people have empathy for other people. They literally don't understand it. So of course they can't tell good stories. Of course they don't understand that when they put Luke Skywalker in front of you as a beleaguered old bastard who tries to kill a child in his sleep, they're like, why didn't people like that? Because they're psychos and they don't understand humanity on a basic level. Exactly, to psychopaths. Good ideas like that don't make sense to them. It's literally unthinkable to capitalists. Yeah. They also portrayed the working class as becoming a bunch of theocratic fascists for an organization that challenges the monarchy. Yeah, shit's not made for you to love the people. It's definitely true. So, now that we've got a good amount of people in the room today, this is the first thing that I wanted to play. I think it's the most important thing that's happened maybe all year. Here is Zelensky having a phone call with Macron. Gonna have to do a quick refresh. Let me know if the audio is any good. Do, 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 do.
So you know that they are now in some more cities, the centers of some regions. There are tanks, airplanes already. They are there, and now they're in Kiev. We are fighting in Kiev. I mean,
they are with special forces and helicopters, or?
yes, airplanes and helicopters, everything. We see it in video. We see it everything. A lot of.
Do you have an idea on how many civilians were killed already?
No, thousands.
And what about you? Are you in security yourself?
I think so.
Are you sure, or do you think so?
I think so. I'm sure. I think nobody is in safety situation now in Kiev. I think so because we are in the circle of Russian army.
So which means that they sent special forces everywhere in Kiev?
Everywhere. In Kiev, in Odessa, and from Belarus. So we fight everywhere on our territory, everywhere in truth. We couldn't imagine that it's not the same like it was in 2014. So it's much better, much more. I mean that much more.
No, it's clear. It's total war.
Yes, total war.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. So I think, Emmanuel, it's very important to you to speak with Putin, and very important to make anti-war coalition. We are sure that European leaders and Biden can connect and call him and say stop. He will stop. He will listen to you. And what I want to say, just stop the war and speak with him.
But he will ask till where you are ready to go. You're ready to sit down around the table and start negotiating.
Of course.
Okay.
We have to. Of course, we have to.
Okay, Volodymyr, as soon as I have a feedback from this side, I will do it. And let me revert to you on what we can do. I mean, for sure, very few things on the Russian side, but let me see with my people what could make sense to help on this issue.
Okay. Thank you.
No, take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
So, from the mouth of the man himself, from Zelensky himself to the French president, we just saw the phone call. The Russians have moved on Kiev. They are describing it as total war. Zelensky is asking Macron to speak with Western people, Biden, for a secession. They want to negotiate. I can't believe it's like come to this, even. I can't believe it's come to the Russians needing to move in to Kiev at all. And that it's very likely, as we move forward in all this, that we'll be looking at some kind of negotiated peace treaty. And the question will be, what are the terms by which the West is going to, how much ground is Russia going to demand? How much land? What does Ukraine look like at the end of all of this? And these are the only questions that seem to really matter anymore. Because it looks as though, from that phone call, that the Russian plan is to end this thing now. That it did finally take, Russia finally admitted to itself and finally said, okay, we're going to have to go in there and we're going to have to end this thing. And it looks like that's exactly what they're doing. And it leads me to wonder, what was it all for? Why did this conflict even happen? What was the war about? Why did the West do this? Why did they push forward on this? What did they gain? What did they even hope to gain from having done this? That the system of capital, that the people who are at the very top of this system are incompetent and incapable. That they lack the basic awareness and the basic sense and the basic empathy and the basic wisdom to look out in the world that they effectively believe they govern and own with anything even remotely connected to a sense of logic, to a sense of compassion, empathy, that the strategy does very straightforwardly seem to be, let's just destroy everything so our enemies can never benefit from it. Let's just declare Russia an enemy. Let's just declare China an enemy. And then acknowledge that we can't invade Russia and we can't invade China. But you know what we can do is we can make sure that Ukraine is destroyed. We can make sure that the Middle East is destroyed. We can make sure that all of these places are destroyed so that nobody can actually gain any support or any connection. They can never build infrastructure. They can never build up their forces in the Middle East. It's as like demonic as it gets, it seems to me. And yet here we are, watching it happen in front of us. Just Me writes, look at our infrastructure projects in Toronto. Letting private companies do it has cost us much more, and the line isn't working. Yeah, because the goal of these quote-unquote developers, they're not really developers, right? Like, it's the same thing that's going on with a lot of these military contractors, right? They just need a project. They just need a cover for their wealth extraction project. Right? They need, so they'll put some lines down and they'll do some stuff, but it'll take them 20 years to do it. Because the goal is not to actually get the project done. They don't care about the project. Right? The very people who are building the project and who are benefiting from financially from siphoning wealth away from the taxpayers are not interested in that project. They're not going to use it. They don't care, right? Their goal is to just get as much money out of the tax base as they possibly can. And this is the excuse. This is the method by which they do it. Right? You look at what other countries do, and they slap this infrastructure together, and it takes them 6 months at most. Right? In some cases, like, you can see videos online where, and not even like China, like straight up like the social democracies, in 48 hours they can put bridges up, and all of this kind of stuff. We're just not interested, because it's not the purpose of our society. Our society is about the worship of money. It's about extracting as much wealth as possible from any system that you find, and that's the best way to build a civil society, right? And the argument, of course, being that the best way to build a civil society is to destroy it. And you can see how success, and a similar thing is happening I just saw, Millie caught red-handed increasing his own salary by 48%. This is the ethos of the day, right? Millie has famously destroyed the Argentinian economy. Poverty has soared like 150%. Inflation is up like 200%. It's a total disaster for Argentina. He's facing major mass strikes, right? And in the midst of that, he's raising his own... Millie was forced just a few days after ordering lower House Speaker Martin Menem to reverse his decision altogether with Vice President Victoria Villarreal to increase the wages of lawmakers by around 30%. Argentine President Javier Millie was forced to announce that he would do the same regarding a pay hike of around 48% he had agreed for himself and the members of his cabinet. Like, this is clownish. Like, it's so obvious that what the system of capital is doing is extracting as much wealth from us as it can get away with and abandoning us. It's so clear that that's the case. We got a guy, Dae Wuku. So, Dae, I'm gonna put it to you that if those are the sorts of statements that you're making about communism, that you probably don't know anything about communism. I've talked about the subject an awful lot, and every single time somebody comes into the chat with a comment like that, it gets pretty clear pretty fast that you don't know anything about communism. So my advice to you, and quite sincerely, like, I'm not trying to dunk on anybody, quite sincerely, you're going to be a lot better off if you just acknowledge and admit that you don't know anything about communism, and to approach the subject with that sense of learning. And start asking yourself, why have I heard these things about communism that are obviously false? Why have I heard these things about communism? And start actually recognizing that the reason why you've heard these things about communism is because you're listening to the antagonists of communism. Like, it would be like taking the loser of a competition seriously when he critiqued the winner. Like, no. Maybe we should actually listen to what people who existed in communist societies and wrote about communist societies have to say, right? Which you haven't, and I think that's a fair thing to say. So maybe start from that perspective and get a little bit more serious about it, because I don't take that commentary seriously at all. Isaac writes, Lloyd Austin said that a key U.S. goal in supporting Ukraine is to see Russia weakened to the degree that it cannot do the kind of things that it has done in invading Ukraine. But what's so stupid about that idea, like what's so dumb about that thought, is that all they've done is strengthen Russia, right? All they've done is strengthen Russia. Like, they sorry. The classic, my grandma lived in the USSR. Sure she did, bud. Yeah, absolutely sure. And she definitely left the USSR being a total supporter. Like, was there any events that happened in the USSR that might cause people to flee the USSR? Is there a big gigantic history of like Nazi collaborators or Tsarists fleeing from the communists? The all they've done is strengthen Russia, right? Not only have they proven that their sanctions will not work on Russia, that Russia has very easily and agilely shifted its economy over to other trading partners and other organizations, right, that are not Western. Russia has now militarized its economy in a way that it hadn't previously. And I think that's the thing that people are really missing. I think that's the thing that people are not really having a big open conversation about, is that now Russia's economy is heavily militarized. It has hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of citizens that have gone through military training and are military personnel and are veterans. It has this military economy and an understanding on how to swiftly and quickly militarize its economy. And it's not going to stop doing that. It's not going to suddenly, now that it's had this taste for power, now that it's had an understanding that, oh, we can do this and be effective and win. We can win. Like, that's the big narrative that the Russians certainly are going to believe, and probably the rest of the global South is going to believe, that if it comes down to a full conflict, between the Russians and the Americans, well, the Russians are going to win. And how do we know? They won in Ukraine. Why aren't they going to win? Looks to us like the Russians have a superior military force and have a population that's more willing to actually engage in military pursuits and are certainly more organized to be able to do it. Like that should be considered a total disaster from the Western perspective. She's a poor farm woman. She told me this is this fellow on Twitch. She was a poor farm woman. So like that means a lot, right? Poor farm woman. So was she a kulak? Right? Was she one of the kulak property owners who had slaves, and then Stalin did the land reformism so that he removed the kulaks from their landlording position? Right? Or was she a Bata? Right? Who worked for the kulaks? Like, no one's denying that there wasn't hardship in the Soviet Union thanks to World War II, right? Thanks to the struggles that the West inflicted on them, the invasions and so on and so forth, right? But to pretend as though, do you know what would happen in a capitalist society facing the same struggle? Your grandma would starve. That's what would happen to your grandma. Like, your story of like, oh, she had to wait in line for rations. Yeah, you know what happened under capitalist societies? Your grandma would starve to death. That's what capitalists would do. Right? Like, I don't understand. Yeah, like, your whole narrative here is that the Soviet Union took care of your grandma. She had a humble position. She was living in humble conditions. The Soviet Union took care of her. Well, capitalists would watch her starve in the streets. And how do I know? Because that's what we're doing now. You can walk down to any capitalist city, anywhere. San Francisco, New York, Austin, Texas, Toronto, Canada, Vancouver, Paris. You can go anywhere in any capitalist country and you're going to see tents erected, tent cities everywhere. People going hungry, people having to make these decisions. And your big complaint to me in the chat about the Soviet Union is that your grandma had food and was completely fine. What are you even here for, bro? What are you even doing? Like, go to the tents. Go have a conversation with the people in the tents. Fantastic. Good for her. Right? She's not living in the tents. Congratulations. The Governor General in Canada just got another raise. What does she even do? Yeah. No, I mean, the system of capital is just extracting wealth and protecting its own, right? It wants the political class on its side. And what's a good way to get the political class on their side? Bribe them. Right? So, you guys know me. Anytime a billionaire dies, we have to point and laugh. U.S. billionaire drowns in Tesla after rescuers struggle with car's strengthened glass. Reinforced glass in Tesla windows can be extremely difficult to break from the inside, especially underwater. Angela Chow, the billionaire sister-in-law of Senator Mitch McConnell, tragically drowned in a pond at her Texas ranch. It is speculated that she may have accidentally put her Tesla in reverse while attempting a three-point turn. Since then, disturbing details have surfaced, recounting the frantic rescue efforts aimed at saving the 50-year-old CEO of shipping company Foremost Group. According to a report by the Wall Street Journal, Chow was driving her Tesla home after an evening with friends when she accidentally put the car in reverse. I bet you her Tesla got hacked, right? Like, come on, let's put the conspiracy tinfoil hat on, right? That she probably ran afoul of somebody, and they probably hacked her Tesla and just drove it into the water. Like, she couldn't get her doors open because they locked them. They just drowned her. Attempts to break into the vehicle were ineffective due to the reinforced glass in the Model X windows and sunroof. Tests conducted by the American Automobile Association show the Model X's glass is nearly impossible to break underwater. It is worth noting that Tesla CEO Elon Musk acknowledged in 2017 that his company made some very foolish mistakes with the Model X design, particularly its complexity. Chow accidentally put her Tesla in reverse instead of drive while performing a three-point turn on her ranch, causing it to plunge down an embankment into a pond. So these things are absolute death traps. As her car began to submerge, Chow panicked and called a friend to explain her situation. Over the next few hours, rescuers arrived and made valiant attempts to free her. One friend, in an attempt to help, had already jumped into the pond in a desperate attempt to reach Chow before emergency responders arrived at the scene. An incident report obtained by the Wall Street Journal suggests one fire department crew arrived on the scene 24 minutes after getting a call. Describing the grim scene, one responder said the car was completely submerged and some deputies from a sheriff department struggled to even stand on it during their rescue attempt. Additional resources like lighting equipment, dive teams, and a tow truck were called in to aid the critical mission. Although the truck arrived on the scene, it did not have a cable long enough to reach the car. Moreover, the driver was reportedly afraid of being electrocuted. A longer cable was finally retrieved. Despite valiant rescue efforts, the two-man crew were not able to pull Chow from the car until around 12:56 a.m. When the doors were open, hundreds of gallons of water poured out of the vehicle. Chow showed no signs of life. Despite 43 minutes of resuscitation, she was announced dead at the scene. The ranch where Chow dies is owned by a corporation tied to her husband, Jim Breyer, a venture capitalist and part-time owner of Boston Celtics. Breyer's net worth is estimated at $2.9 billion. Here we go. The cause of the Tesla crash is under investigation. Regrettably, details about Chow's death are still few and far between. This lack of information has led some, including prominent hedge fund manager J. Kyle Bass, founder of Texas-based Heyman Capital Management, to speculate that Tesla may have been hacked. Huh? Other people said it. It's not just me. Does the Blanco County Sheriff have the technical capacity to investigate the Tesla logs, to determine if the car was tampered with or even hacked? Bass wrote on X. This case continues to become more and more suspicious. Last week, the Blanco County Sheriff's Office described the billionaire's death as an unfortunate accident, further noting that they were still conducting a criminal investigation. Although preliminary investigation indicated that this was an unfortunate accident, the sheriff's office is still investigating this accident as a criminal matter until they have sufficient evidence to rule out criminal activity. The incident was not a typical accident, the agency added. In 2016, Musk revealed that he resorted to sleeping in a sleeping bag in the Tesla factory to address critical quality controls issues, plaguing the new Model X production line. Like, you got billionaires dying in Teslas. You got doors flying off of Boeing 747s mid-flight. Like, it's just ridiculous. this fellow on Twitch who's just willing to double down on this. Honestly, the USSR is what you get when you have communism. Good luck with it. Yeah, you get a society that goes from an agrarian, feudal society to an industrial superpower capable of rivaling the United States, defeating the Nazis, and being the first people into space. Like, sounds like a good deal, right? Jib Jabby, good to see you. Thanks for poking in. What happened to the break? Like, I just think that this thing's a death trap. I think that all of this shit is a death trap. I don't think that they give two fucks at all. Like, when they're designing this stuff, there's probably nobody on site whose job is to be like, how is this safe? Is this a thing that somebody should get into? Is this a thing? Like, it's literally just like tech bros being like, whoa, look how fast it goes. Wouldn't it be cool if? Yeah. And there's just nobody on site whose job is to be like, that's unsafe. Like, nobody should get into that thing. Like, wait, so you're making a vehicle that can't be broken into literally with like jaws of life. You're telling me that if there's some kind of crisis and we need to rip off the door with the jaws of life, this vehicle won't let it happen? It's unsafe. Don't get in this thing. And there's just nobody whose job is to do that. And in fact, if there was somebody whose job is to do that, Elon Musk would probably be like, man, what a bummer. Let's get rid of that guy. Right? Yeah, they've admitted that every car with a computer chip can be hacked. Yeah. And like, you've got to assume that a billionaire somewhere, right? You gotta believe that if a billionaire is involved in it, it's just not as simple as like oopsie doo. Like, I don't buy into this at all. Like this idea that it's like, oh, I oopsie dooed into a reverse instead of a drive, and I went oopsie doo into the oopsie doo into a oopsie doo. Like probably not. Seems pretty unlikely to me. Like, it just seems to me like if like, roll the window down. Like, there's so many things about this story that has me going like, what? Like, it sounds like it was all happening in super slow motion. That like the vehicle was in the water and she was able to call people, and like there was a emergency vehicle showing up and all of this kind of stuff. And it's just like, what? Like, what? I just, and it's like a pond at her Texas ranch, you know? There's just a lot in this story that has me going like, suspicious as fuck. Suspicious as fuck. I'm glad to hear that anybody is actually going like, maybe we should investigate this as if it's a criminal, maybe there was some crime. Because that seems to be the rarest thing now. It just seems like everybody's willing to just be like, oops, they do. Welp. Oh, so they honored a Nazi in Parliament. Oops, they do. Welp. No investigation required. Here's an article that came across my desk. Go away. How the CIA made Google. This one's from the Discord. Inside, this is from medium.com, so not exactly a fringe lefty news organization. This is just part one. Inside the secret network behind mass surveillance, endless war, and Skynet, by Nafiz Ahmed. And in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris, Western governments are moving fast to legitimize expanded powers of mass surveillance and controls on the internet, all in the name of fighting terrorism. US and European politicians have called to protect NSA-style snooping and to advance the capacity to intrude on internet privacy by outlawing encryption. One idea is to establish a telecoms partnership that would unilaterally delete content deemed to fuel hatred and violence in situations considered appropriate. Heated discussions are going on at government and parliamentary levels to explore cracking down on lawyer-client confidentiality. What any of this would have done to prevent the Charlie Hebdo attacks remains a mystery, especially given that we already know the terrorists were on the radar of French intelligence for up to a decade. There is little new in this story. The 9/11 atrocity was the first of many terrorist attacks, each succeeded by the dramatic extension of draconian state powers at the expense of civil liberties, backed up with the projection of military force in regions identified as hotspots, harboring terrorists. Yet there is little indication that this tried and tested formula has done anything to reduce the danger. If anything, we appear to be locked into a deepening cycle of violence, with no clear end in sight. As our governments push to increase their powers, insurge intelligence can now reveal the vast extent to which the U.S. intelligence community is implicated in nurturing the web platforms we know today, for the precise purpose of utilizing the technology as a mechanism to fight global information war, a war to legitimize the power of the few over the rest of us. The linchpin of this story is the corporation that in many ways defines the 21st century, with its unobtrusive omnipresence, Google. Google styles itself as a friendly, funky, user-friendly tech firm that rose to prominence through a combination of skill, luck, and genuine innovation. This is true, but it is a mere fragment of the story. In reality, Google is a smokescreen behind which lurks the U.S. military-industrial complex. The inside story of Google's rise, revealed here for the first time, opens a can of worms that goes far beyond Google, unexpectedly shining a light on the existence of a parasitical network driving the evolution of the U.S. national security apparatus and profiting obscenely from its observation. The Shadow Network. For the last 2 decades, U.S. foreign and intelligence strategies have resulted in a global war on terror, consisting of prolonged military invasions in the Muslim world and comprehensive surveillance of civilian populations. These strategies have been incubated, if not dictated, by a secret network inside and beyond the Pentagon. Established under the Clinton administration, consolidated under Bush, and firmly entrenched under Obama, this bipartisan network of mostly neoconservative ideologues sealed its dominion inside the U.S. Department of Defense by the dawn of 2015, through the operation of an obscene corporate entity, or an obscure corporate entity outside the Pentagon, that's run by the Pentagon. In 1999, the CIA created its own venture capital investment firm, In-Q-Tel, to fund promising startups that might create technologies useful for intelligence agencies. But the inspiration for In-Q-Tel came earlier, when the Pentagon set up its own private sector outfit. Known as the Highlands Forum, this private network has operated as a bridge between the Pentagon and powerful American elites outside the military since the mid-1990s. Despite changes in civilian administrations, the network around the Highlands Forum has become increasingly successful in dominating U.S. defense policy. Giant defense contractors like Booz Allen Hamilton and Science Applications International Corporation are sometimes referred to as the shadow intelligence community due to the revolving doors between them and the government, and their capacity to simultaneously influence and profit from defense policy. But while these contractors compete for power and money, they also collaborate where it counts. The Highlands Forum has spent 20 years, provided an off-the-record space for some of the most prominent members of the shadow intelligence community to convene with senior U.S. government officials, alongside other leaders in relevant industries. I first stumbled upon the existence of this network in November 2014, when I reported for Vice's Motherboard that U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel newly announced Defense Innovation Initiative was really about building Skynet, or something like it, essentially to dominate an emerging era of automated robotic warfare. That story was based on a little-known Pentagon-funded white paper published 2 months earlier by the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., a leading U.S. military-run institution that, among other things, generates research to develop U.S. defense policy at the highest levels. The white paper clarified the thinking behind the new initiative and the revolutionary scientific and technological developments it had hoped to capitalize on. The Highlands Forum. The co-author of that NDU white paper is Linton Wells, a 51-year veteran U.S. defense official who served in the Bush administration as the Pentagon's chief information officer, overseeing the National Security Agency and other spy agencies. He still holds active top-secret security clearances, and according to a report by Government Executive magazine in 2006, he chaired the Highlands Forum, founded by the Pentagon in 1996. New Scientist magazine has compared the Highlands Forum to elite meetings like Davos, Ditchley, and Aspen, describing it as far less well-known, yet arguably just as influential a talking shop. Regular forum meetings bring together innovative people to consider interactions between policy and technology. Its biggest successes have been in the development of high-tech network-based warfare. Given Wells' role in such a forum, perhaps it was not surprising that his defense transformation white paper was able to have such a profound impact on actual Pentagon policy. But if this was the case, why had no one noticed? Despite being sponsored by the Pentagon, I could find no official page on the DoD website about the forum. Active and former U.S. military and intelligence sources had never heard of it, and neither did national security journalists. I was baffled. The Pentagon's intellectual capital venture firm. In the prologue to his 27 book, A Crowd of One, The Future of Individual Identity, John Klippinger, an MIT scientist of the Median Lab Human Dynamics Group, describes how he participated in a Highlands Forum gathering, an invitation-only meeting funded by the Department of Defense and chaired by the Assistant for Networks and Information Integration. This was a senior DoD post overseeing operations and policies for the Pentagon's most powerful spy agencies, including the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, among others. Starting from 2003, the position was transitioned into what is now the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. The Highlands Forum, Klippinger wrote, was founded by a retired U.S. Navy captain named Dick O'Neill. Delegates include senior U.S. military officials across numerous agencies and divisions, captains, rear admirals, generals, colonels, majors, and commanders, as well as members of the DoD leadership. What at first appeared to be the forum's main website describes Highlands as an informal cross-disciplinary network sponsored by federal government, focusing on information, science, and technology. Explanation is sparse, beyond a single Department of Defense logo. But Highlands also has another website describing itself as an intellectual capital venture firm, with extensive experience assisting corporations, organizations, and government leaders. The firm provides a wide range of services, including strategic planning, scenario creation, and gaming for expanding global markets, as well as working with clients to build strategies for execution. The Highlands Group Incorporated, the website says, organizes a whole range of forums on these issues. For instance, in addition to the Highlands Forum, since 9/11, the group runs the Island Forum, an international event held in association with Singapore's Ministry of Defense, which O'Neill oversees as lead consultant. The Singapore Ministry of Defense website describes the Island Forum as patterned after the Highlands Forum organized for the United States Department of Defense. Documents leaked by NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden confirmed that Singapore played a key role in permitting the USA and Australia to tap underseas cables to spy on Asian powers like Indonesia and Malaysia. The Highlands Group website also reveals that Highlands is partnered with one of the most powerful defense contractors in the United States. Highlands is supported by a network of companies and independent researchers, including our Highlands Forum partners for the past 10 years at SAIC and the vast Highlands networks of participants in the Highlands Forum. SAIC stands for the U.S. defense firm Science Applications International Corporation, which changed its name to Leidos in 2013, operating SAIC as a subsidiary. SAIC Leidos is among the top 10 largest defense contractors in the United States and works closely with the United States intelligence community, especially the NSA. According to the investigative journalist Tim Sharrock, the first to disclose the vast extent of the privatization of the United States intelligence with his seminal book, Spies for Hire, SAIC has a symbiotic relationship with the NSA. The agency is the company's largest single customer, and the SAIC is the NSA's largest contractor. The full name of Captain Dick O'Neill, the founding president of the Highlands Forum, is Richard Patrick O'Neill, who after his work in the Navy joined the Department of Defense. He served his last post as Deputy for Strategy and Policy in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Defense for Command, Control, Communications, and Intelligence before setting up Highlands, the Club of Yoda. But Klippinger also referred to another mysterious individual revered by forum attendees. He sat at the back of the room, expressionless behind thick, black-rimmed glasses. I never heard him utter a word. Andrew Andy Marshall is an icon within DoD. Some call him Yoda, indicative of his mythical, inscrutable status. He had served many administrations and was widely regarded as above partisan politics. He was a supporter of the Highlands Forum and a regular fixture from its beginning. Since 1973, Marshall was headed up one of the Pentagon's most powerful agencies, the Office of Net Assessments, the United States Defense Secretary's internal think tank, which conducts highly classified research on future planning for defense policy across the United States military and intelligence community. The ONA has played a key role in major Pentagon strategy initiatives, including maritime strategy, the Strategic Defense Initiative, and the Competitive Strategies Initiative, and the Revolution in Military Affairs. In a rare 2002 profile in Wired, reporter Douglas McRae described Andrew Marshall, now 93 years old, as the DoD's most elusive, but one of its most influential officials. McRae added that Vice President Dick Cheney, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and Deputy Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, widely considered the hawks of the neoconservative movement in American politics, were among Marshall's star protégés. Speaking at a low-key Harvard University seminar a few months after 9/11, Highlands Forum founding president Richard O'Neill said that Marshall was much more than a regular fixture at the forum. Andy Marshall is our co-chair, so indirectly everything that we do goes back into Andy's system, he told the audience. Directly, people who are in the forum meetings may be going back to give briefings to Andy on a variety of topics and to synthesize things. He also said that the forum had a third co-chair, the director of the Defense Advanced Research and Projects Agency, DARPA, which at the time was a Rumsfeld appointee, Anthony J. Tether. Before joining DARPA, Tether was a vice president of SAIC's Advanced Technology Sector. The Highlands Forum's influence on U.S. defense policy has thus operated through three main channels. Its sponsorship by the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Around the middle of the last decade, this was transitioned specifically to the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, which is in charge of the main surveillance agencies. Its direct link to Andrew Yoda Marshall's ONA, and its direct link to DARPA. According to Klippinger in A Crowd of One, what happens at informal gatherings such as the Highlands Forum could, over time and through unforeseen curious paths of influence, have enormous impact, not just within the DoD, but throughout the world. He wrote that the forum's ideas have moved from being heretical to mainstream. Ideas that were anathema in 1999 had been adopted as policies just 3 years later. Although the forum does not produce consensus recommendations, its impact is deeper than a traditional government advisory committee. The ideas that emerge from meetings are available for use by decision makers, as well as by people from the think tanks, according to O'Neill. We'll include people from BOOZ, SAIC, RAND, and others at our meetings. We welcome that kind of cooperation because, truthfully, they have the gravitas. They are there for the long haul and are able to influence government policies with real scholarly work. We produce ideas and interactions and networks for these people to take and use as they need. My repeated requests to O'Neill for information on his work at the Highlands Forum were ignored. The Department of Defense also did not respond to multiple requests for information and comment on the forum. Information warfare. The Highlands Forum has served as a two-way influence bridge. On the one hand, for the shadow network of private contractors to influence the formation of information operations policy across the United States military intelligence. On the other, for the Pentagon to influence what is going on in the private sector. There is no clearer evidence of this than the truly instrumental role of the Forum in incubating the idea of mass surveillance as a mechanism to dominate information on a global scale. In 1989, Richard O'Neill, then a U.S. Navy cryptologist, wrote a paper for the U.S. Navy War College, Towards a Methodology for Perception Management. In his book, Future Wars, Colonel John Alexander, then a senior officer in the U.S. Army's Intelligence and Security Command, INSCOM, records that O'Neill's paper for the first time outlined a strategy for perception management as part of information warfare. O'Neill's proposed strategy identified three categories of targets for IW: adversaries, so they believed that they are vulnerable; potential partners, so they perceive the cause of war as just; and finally, civilian populations and the political leadership, so they perceive the cost as worth the effort. A secret briefing based on O'Neill's work made its way to the top leadership at DoD. They acknowledged that O'Neill was right and told him to bury it. Except the DoD didn't bury it. Around 1994, the Highlands Group was founded by O'Neill as an official Pentagon project, at the appointment of Bill Clinton's then Defense Secretary, William Perry, who went on to join SAIC's board of directors after retiring from government in 2003. In O'Neill's own words, the group would function as the Pentagon's Ideas Lab. According to government executive, military and information technology experts gathered at the first forum meeting to consider the impacts of IT and globalization on the United States and on warfare. How would the internet and other emerging technologies change the world? The meeting helped plant the idea of network-centric warfare in the minds of the nation's top military thinkers. Excluding the public. Official Pentagon records confirm that the Highlands Forum's primary goal was to support DoD policies on O'Neill's specialism, information warfare. According to the Pentagon's 1997 annual report to the President and Congress, under a section titled Information Operations, the Office of the Secretary of Defense had authorized the establishment of the Highlands Group of key DoD industries and academic I.O. experts to coordinate I.O. across federal military intelligence agencies. The following year, DoD's annual report reiterated the forum's centrality to information operations. To examine I.O. issues, DoD sponsors and Highlands Forum, which bring together governments, industry, and academic professionals from various fields. Notice that in 1998, the Highlands Group became a forum, according to O'Neill. This was to avoid subjecting Highland Forum's meetings to bureaucratic restrictions, which he was alluding to was Federal Advisory Committee Act, which regulates the way the U.S. government can formally solicit the advice of special interests. Known as the Open Government Law, FACA requires that the U.S. government officials cannot hold closed doors or secret consultations with people outside government to develop policy. All such consultations should take place via federal advisory committees that permit public scrutiny. FACA requires that meetings be held in public, announced via the Federal Register, that advisory groups are registered with an office at the General Services Administration, among other requirements intended to maintain accountability to the public interest. But Government Executive reported that O'Neill and others believed such regulatory issues would quell the free flow of ideas and no-holds-barred discussions they sought. Pentagon lawyers had warned that the group might necessitate certain obligations and advise running the whole thing privately. So O'Neill renamed it the Highlands Forum and moved into the private sector to manage it as a consultant to the Pentagon. The Pentagon Highlands Forum thus runs under the mantle of O'Neill's intellectual capital venture firm, Highlands Group Incorporated. In 1995, a year after William Perry appointed O'Neill to head up the Highlands Forum, SAIC, the forum's partner organization, launched a new Center for Information Strategy and Policy under the direction of Jeffrey Cooper, a member of the Highlands Group who advises senior Defense Department officials on information warfare issues. The center had precisely the same objective as the forum, to function as a clearinghouse, to bring together the best and brightest minds in information warfare by sponsoring a continuing series of seminars, papers, and symposia which explore the implications of information warfare in depth. The aim was to enable leaders and policymakers from government, industry, and academia to address key issues surrounding information warfare to ensure the United States retains its edge over any and all potential enemies. Despite FACA regulations, federal advisory committees are already heavily influenced, if not captured, by corporate power. So, in bypassing FACA, the Pentagon overrode even the loose restrictions of FACA by permanently excluding any possibility of public engagement. O'Neill's claim that there are no reports or recommendations is disingenuous. By his own admission, the secret Pentagon consultations with industry that have taken place through the Highlands Forum since 1994 have been accompanied by regular presentations of academic and policy papers, recordings and notes of meetings, and other forms of documentation that are locked behind a login only accessible by forum delegates. This violates the spirit, if not the letter, of FACA in a way that is patently intended to circumvent democratic accountability and the rule of law. The Highlands Forum doesn't need to produce consensus recommendations. Its purpose is to provide the Pentagon a shadow social networking mechanism to cement lasting relationships with corporate power and to identify new talent that can be used to fine-tune information warfare strategies in absolute secrecy. Total participants in the DoD's Highlands Forum number over 1,000, although sessions largely consist of small closed workshop-style gatherings of maximum 25 to 30 people, bringing together experts and officials depending on the subject. Delegates have included senior personnel from SAIC and Booz Allen Hamilton, Rand Corporation, Cisco, Human Genome Sciences, eBay, PayPal, IBM, Google, Microsoft, AT&T, the BBC, Disney, General Electric, Enron, among innumerable others. Democrat and Republican members of Congress and the Senate, senior executives from the U.S. energy industry, such as Daniel Yergin of IHS Cambridge Energy Research Associates, and key people involved in both sides of presidential campaigns. Other participants have included senior media professionals, David Ignatius, associate editor of the Washington Post, and at the time the executive editor of the International Herald Tribune, Thomas Friedman, a longtime New York Times columnist, Arnaud de Boschgrave, an editor at the Washington Times, and United Press International Stephen Levy, a former Newsweek editor, senior writer for Wired, and now chief tech editor at Medium, Lawrence Wright, staff writer at The New Yorker, Noah Shatman, executive editor at The Daily Beast, Rebecca McKinnon, co-founder of Global Voices Online, Nick Gowan of the BBC, and John Markoff of the New York Times. Due to its current sponsorship by the OSD's Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, the forum has inside access to the chiefs of the main U.S. surveillance and reconnaissance agencies, as well as the directors and their assistants at DoD research agencies, from DARPA to the ONA. This also means that the forum is deeply plugged into the Pentagon's policy research task forces. Google, seeded by the Pentagon. In 1994, the same year the Highlands Forum was founded under the stewardship of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the ONA, and DARPA, two young PhD students at Stanford University, Sergey Brin and Larry Page made their breakthrough on the first automated web crawling and page ranking application. That application remains the core component of what eventually became Google's search services. Brin and Page had performed their work with funding from the Digital Library Initiative, a multi-agency program of the National Science Foundation, NASA, and DARPA. But that's just one side of the story. Throughout the development of the search engine, Sergey Brin reported regularly and directly to two people who were not Stanford faculty at all, Dr. Bhavani Thurasingham and Dr. Rick Steinhazer. Both were representatives of a sensitive U.S. agency community research program on information security and data mining. Thurasingham is currently the Louis A. Burchell Distinguished Professor and Executive Director of the Cybersecurity Research Institute at the University of Texas, Dallas, and a sought-after expert on data mining, data management, and information security issues. But in the 1990s, she worked for the MITR Corp, a leading U.S. defense contractor, where she managed the Massive Digital Data Systems Initiative, a project sponsored by the NSA, CIA, and the Director of Central Intelligence to foster innovative research in information technology. We funded Stanford University through the computer scientist Jeffrey Ullman, who had several promising graduate students working on many exciting areas, Professor Thurasingham told me. One of them was Sergey Brin, the founder of Google. The intelligence community's MDDS program essentially provided Brin seed funding, which was supplemented by many other sources, including the private sector. This sort of funding is certainly not unusual, and Sergey Brin being able to receive it by being a graduate student at Stanford appears to have been incidental. The Pentagon was all over computer science research at this time, but it illustrates how deeply entrenched the culture of Silicon Valley is in the values of the U.S. intelligence community. In an extraordinary document, hosted by the website of the University of Texas, Thurasingham recounts that from 1993 to 1999, the intelligence community started a program called Massive Digital Data Systems that I was managing for the intelligence community when I was the MITR Corporation. The program funded 15 research efforts at various universities, including Stanford. Its goal was developing data management technology to manage several terabytes to petabytes of data, including for query processing, transaction management, metadata management, storage management, and data integration. At the time, Thurasingham was chief scientist for data and information management at MITR, where she led team research and development efforts for the NSA, CIA, U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory, as well as the U.S. Navy's Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command, and Communications and Electronic Command. She went on to teach courses for the United States government officials and defense contractors on U.S. data mining in counterterrorism. In her University of Texas article, she attaches the copy of an abstract of the U.S. intelligence community's MDDS program that had been presented to the annual Intelligence Community Symposium in 1995. The abstract reveals that the primary sponsors of the MDDS program were three agencies: the NSA, the CIA's Office of Research and Development, and the intelligence community's Community Management Staff, which operates under the Director of Central Intelligence. Administrators of the program, which provided funding of around $3 to $4 million per year for 3 to 4 years, were identified as Hal Curran, Robert Klutz, Dr. Claudia Pierce, Dr. Rick Steinhauser, and Dr. Thurasingham herself. Thurasingham goes on in her article to reiterate that this joint CIA-NSA program partially funded Sergey Brin to develop the core of Google through a grant to Stanford managed by Brin's supervisor, Professor Jeffrey D. Ullman. In fact, the Google founder, Mr. Sergey Brin, was partially funded by this program while he was a PhD student at Stanford. He, together with his advisor, Professor Jeffrey Ullman, and my colleague at MITR, Dr. Chris Clifton, MITR's chief scientist in IT, developed the Query Flux system, which produced solutions for mining large amounts of data stored in databases. I remembered visiting Stanford with Dr. Rick Steinheiser from the intelligence community, and Mr. Brin would rush in on rollerblades, give his presentation, and rush out. In fact, the last time we met in September 1998, Mr. Brin demonstrated to us his search engine, which became Google soon after. Brin and Page officially incorporated Google as a company in September 1998, the very month they last reported to Thrasingham and Steinheiser. QueryFlox was also part of Google's patented PageRank search system, which Brin developed at Stanford under the CIA NSA MDDS program, as well as with funding from the NSF, IBM, and Hitachi. That year, Mitra's Dr. Chris Clifton, who worked under Thrasingham to develop the QueryFlox system, co-authored a paper with Brin's supervisor, Professor Ullman, and the CIA's Rick Steinheiser, titled Knowledge Discovery in Text. The paper was presented in an academic conference. The MDDS funding that supported Brin was significant as far as seed funding goes, but it was probably outweighed by the other funding streams, said Thrasingham. The duration of Brin's funding was around 2 years or so. In that period, I and my colleagues from the MDDS would visit Stanford to see Brin and monitor his progress every 3 months or so. We didn't supervise exactly, but we did want to check progress, point out potential problems, and suggest ideas. In those briefings, Brin did present to us on the QueryFlox research, and also demonstrated to us versions of the Google search engine. Brin thus reported to Thrasingham and Steinheiser regularly about his work developing Google. Since publication of this article, Professor Thrasingham has amended her article referenced above. The amended version includes a new modified statement, followed by a copy of the original version of her account of the MDDS. In this amended version, Thrasingham rejects the idea that CIA funded Google, and instead says, in fact, Professor Jeffrey Ullman at Stanford and my colleague at MITR, Dr. Chris Clifton, together with some others developed the QueryFlox system as part of MDDS, which produced solutions for mining large amounts of data stored in databases. Also, Mr. Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, was part of Professor Ullman's research group at that time. I remember visiting Stanford with Dr. Rick Steinheiser from the intelligence community periodically, and Mr. Brin would rush in on rollerblades, give his presentation, and rush out. During our last visit to Stanford in September 1998, Mr. Brin demonstrated to us his search engine, which I believe became Google soon after. There are also several inaccuracies in Dr. Ahmed's article, dated January 22nd, 2015. For example, the MDDS program was not a sensitive program, as stated by Dr. Ahmed. It was an unclassified program that funded universities in the U.S. Furthermore, Sergey Brin never reported to me or to Dr. Rick Steinheiser. He only gave presentations to us during our visits to the Department of Computer Sciences at Stanford during the 1990s. Also, MDDS never funded Google. It funded Stanford University. Here, there is no substantive factual difference in Thrasingham's account other than to assert that her statement associating Sergey Brin with the development of QueryFlox is mistaken. Notably, this acknowledgement is derived not from her own knowledge, but from this very article's quoting a comment from a Google spokesperson. However, this bizarre attempt to disassociate Google from the MDDS program misses the mark. Firstly, the MDDS never funded Google because during the development of the core components of the Google search engine, there was no company incorporated with that name. The grant was instead provided to Stanford University through Professor Ullman, through whom some MDDS funding was used to support Brin, who was co-developing Google at that time. Secondly, Thrasingham then adds that Brin never reported to her or the CIA's Steinheiser, but admits he gave presentations to us during our visits to the Department of Computer Sciences at Stanford during the 90s. It is unclear, though, what the distinction is here between reporting and delivering a detailed presentation. Either way, Thrasingham confirms that she and the CIA had taken a keen interest in Brin's development of Google. Thirdly, Thrasingham describes the MDDS program as unclassified, but this does not contradict its sensitive nature. As someone who has worked for decades as an intelligence contractor and advisor, Thrasingham is surely aware that there are many ways of categorizing intelligence, including sensitive but unclassified. A number of former U.S. intelligence officials I spoke to said that the almost total lack of public information on the CIA and NSA's MDDS initiative suggests that although the program was not classified, it is likely instead that its contents was considered sensitive, which would explain efforts to minimize transparency about how the program and the way it fed back into developing tools for the United States intelligence community. Fourthly, and finally, it is important to point out that the MDDS abstract, which Thrasingham includes in her University of Texas document, states clearly not only that the Director of Central Intelligence's CMS, CIA, and NSA were overseers of the MDDS initiative, but that the intended customer of the project were the DoD, IC, and other government organizations, the Pentagon, U.S. intelligence community, and other relevant U.S. government agencies. In other words, the provision of MDDS funding to Brin through Ullman under the oversight of Thrasingham and Steinhauser was fundamentally because they recognized the potential utility of Brin's work developing Google to the Pentagon, intelligence community, and the federal government at large. I have to pause here for a second, guys. I really have to use the bathroom. 1 second. 1 second. I hate to break mid-article, but when you gotta go, you gotta go. And this is only part 1 of 2. The MDDS program is actually referenced in several papers co-authored by Brin and Page while at Stanford, specifically highlighting its role in financially sponsoring Brin in the development of Google. In their 1998 paper published in the Bulletin of the IEEE Computer Society Technical Committee on Data Engineering, they describe the automation of methods to extract information from the web via dual iterative pattern relation extraction, the development of a global ranking of web pages called PageRank, and the use of PageRank to develop a novel search engine called Google. Through an opening footnote, Sergey Brin confirms he was partially supported by the Community Management Staff Massive Digital Data Systems Program, NSF Grant IRI 9631952, confirming that Brin's work developing Google was indeed partially funded by the CIA NSA MDDS program. This NSF grant, identified alongside the MDDS, whose project report lists Brin among the students supported without mentioning the MDDS, was different to the NSF grant to Larry Page, that included funding from DARPA and NASA. The project report, authored by Brin's supervisor, Professor Ullman, goes on to say under the section Indications of Success that there are some news stories of startups based on NSF-supported research. Under Project Impact, the report remarks, finally, the Google project has also gone commercial as Google.com. Thrasingham's account, including her new amended version, therefore demonstrates that the CIA NSA MDDS program was not only partially funded Brin throughout his work with Larry Page developing Google, but that senior U.S. intelligence representatives, including a CIA official, oversaw the evolution of Google in this pre-launch phase, all the way until the company was ready to be officially founded. Google, then, had been enabled with a significant amount of seed funding and oversight from the Pentagon, namely the CIA, NSA, and DARPA. The DoD could not be reached for comment. When I asked Professor Ullman to confirm whether or not Brin was partially funded under the intelligence community's MDDS program and whether Ullman was aware that Brin was regularly briefing the CIA's Rick Steinheiser on his progress in developing the Google search engine, Ullman's responses were evasive. May I know whom you represent and why you are interested in these issues? Who are your sources? He also denied that Brin played a significant role in developing the QueryFlox system, although it's clear from Brin's papers that he did draw on that work in co-developing the PageRank system with Page. When I asked Ullman whether he was denying the U.S. intelligence community's role in supporting Brin during the development of Google, he said, "I'm not going to dignify this nonsense with a denial. If you won't explain what your theory is and what point you are trying to make, I am not going to help you in the slightest." The MDDS abstract, published online at the University of Texas, confirms that the rationale for the CIA-NSA project was to provide seed money to develop data management technologies, which are of high risk and high payoff, including techniques for querying, browsing, and filtering, transaction process, access methods and indicating, and indexing, metadata management, and data modeling, and integrating heterogeneous databases, as well as developing appropriate architectures. The ultimate vision of the program was to provide for the seamless access and fusion of massive amounts of data, information, and knowledge in a heterogeneous real-time environment for use by the Pentagon, intelligence community, and potentially across government. These revelations corroborate the claims of Robert Steele, former senior CIA officer and a founding civilian deputy director of the Marine Corps Intelligence Activity, whom I interviewed for The Guardian last year on open source intelligence. Citing sources at the CIA, Steele had said in 2006 that Steinheiser, an old colleague of his, was the CIA's main liaison at Google and had arranged early funding for the pioneering IT firm. At that time, Wired founder John Battelle managed to get this official denial from a Google spokesperson in response to Steele's assertion. The statements relating to Google are completely untrue. This time around, despite multiple requests and conversations, a Google spokesperson declined to comment. Update. As of 5:41 p.m. GMT, 22nd of January 2015, Google's Director of Corporate Communication got in touch and asked me to include the following statement. Sergey Brin was not part of the QueryFlox program at Stanford, nor were any of his projects funded by U.S. intelligence bodies. This is what I wrote back. My response to that statement would be as follows. Brin himself in his own paper acknowledges funding from the community management staff of the massive Digital Data Systems Initiative, which was supplied through the NSF. The MDDS was an intelligence community program set up by the CIA and NSA. I also have it on record, as noted in the piece from Professor Thurasingham of the University of Texas, that she managed the MDDS program on behalf of the United States intelligence community, and that her and the CIA's Rick Steinheiser met Brin every 3 months or so for 2 years to be briefed on his program developing Google and PageRank. Whether Brin worked on QueryFlox or not is neither here nor there. In that context, you might want to consider the following questions. 1. Does Google deny that Brin's work was part funded by the MDDS via an NSF grant? 2. Does Google deny that Brin reported regularly to Thurasingham and Steinheiser from around 1996 to 1998 until September that year, when he presented the Google search engine to them? Total information awareness. A call for papers for the MDDS was sent out via email list on November 3, 1993, from senior U.S. intelligence official David Charvonia, Director of the Research and Development Coordination Office of the Intelligence Community's CMS. The reaction from Tautu Ylönen, celebrated inventor of the widely used Secure Shell data protection protocol, to his colleagues on the email list is telling. Crypto relevance makes you think whether you should protect your data. The email also confirms that defense contractor and Highlands Forum partner SAIC was managing the MDDS submission process, with abstracts to be sent to Jackie Booth of the CIA's Office of Research and Development via a SAIC email address. By 1997, Thrasingham reveals, shortly before Google became incorporated and while she was still overseeing the development of its search engine software at Stanford, her thoughts turned to the national security applications of the MDDS program. In the acknowledgments to her book, Web Data Mining and Applications in Business Intelligence and Counterterrorism, Thrasingham writes that she and Dr. Rick Steinheiser of the CIA began discussions with Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency on applying data mining for counterterrorism, an idea that resulted directly from the MDDS program, which partially funded Google. These discussions eventually developed into the current EELD, Evidence Extraction and Link Detection Program at DARPA. So the very same senior CIA official and CIA NSA contractor involved in providing the seed funding for Google were simultaneously contemplating the role of data mining for counterterrorism purposes and were developing ideas for tools actually advanced by DARPA. Today, this illustrated by her recent op-ed in the New York Times, Thrasingham remains a staunch advocate of data mining for counterterrorism purposes, but also insists these methods must be developed by government in cooperation with civil liberties lawyers and privacy advocates to ensure that robust procedures are in place to prevent potential abuse. She points out, damningly, that with the quantity of information being collected, there is a high risk of false positives. In 1993, when the MDS program was launched and managed by Meter Corp on behalf of the U.S. intelligence community, University of Virginia computer scientist Dr. Anita K. Jones, a Meter trustee, landed the job of DARPA director and head of research and engineering across the Pentagon. She had been on the board of Meter since 1988. From 1987 to 1993, Jones simultaneously served on SAIC's board of directors. As the new head of DARPA from 1993 to 1997, she also co-chaired the Pentagon's Highlands Forum during the period of Google's pre-launch development at Stanford under the MDSS. Thus, when Thrasingham and Steinheiser were talking to DARPA about the counterterrorism applications of MDDS research, Jones was DARPA's director and Highlands Forum co-chair. That year, Jones left DARPA to return to her post at the University of Virginia. The following year, she joined the board of the National Science Foundation, which of course had also just funded Brin and Page, and also returned to the board of SAIC. When she left DoD, Senator Chuck Robb paid Jones the following tribute. She brought the technology and operational military communities together to design detailed plans to sustain U.S. dominance on the battlefield into the next century. On the board of the National Science Foundation from 1992 to 1998, including a stint as chairman from 1996, was Richard N. Zare. This was the period in which the NSF sponsored Sergey Brin and Larry Page in association with DARPA. In June 1994, Professor Zare, a chemist at Stanford, participated with Professor Jeffrey Ullman, who supervised Sergey Brin's research, on a panel sponsored by Stanford and the National Research Council, discussing the need for scientists to show how their work ties to national needs. The panel brought together scientists and policymakers, including Washington insiders. DARPA's EILD program, inspired by the work of Thrasingham and Steinheiser under Jones's watch, was rapidly adapted and integrated with a suite of tools to conduct comprehensive surveillance under the Bush administration. According to DARPA official Ted Senator, who led the EILD program for the agency's short-lived Information Awareness Office, EILD was among a range of promising techniques, being prepared for integration into the prototype TIA system. TIA stood for Total Information Awareness and was the main global electronics eavesdropping and data mining program deployed by the Bush administration after 9/11. TIA had been set up by Iran-Contra conspirator Admiral John Poindexter, who was appointed in 2002 by Bush to lead DARPA's new Information Awareness Office. The Xerox Palo Alto Research Center was another contractor among the 26 companies, also including SAIC, that received million-dollar contracts from DARPA. The specific quantities remain classified. Under Poindexter, to push forward the TIA surveillance program in 2002 onward. The research included behavior-based profiling, automated detection, identification and tracking of terrorist activities, among other data analyzing projects. At this time, Park's director and chief scientist was John Seeley Brown. Both Brown and Poindexter were Pentagon Highland Forum participants, Brown on a regular basis, until recently. TIA was purportedly shut down in 2003 due to public opposition after the program was exposed in the media, but the following year, Poindexter participated in a Pentagon Highlands group session in Singapore, alongside defense and security officials from around the world. Meanwhile, Ted Senator continued to manage the EELD program among other data mining and analysis projects at DARPA until 2006, when he left to become a vice president at SAIC. He is now an SAIC Leidos Technical Fellow. Google, DARPA, and the Money Trail. Long before the appearance of Sergey Brin and Larry Page, Stanford University's Computer Science Department had a close working relationship with U.S. military intelligence. A letter dated November 5, 1984, from the office of renowned artificial intelligence expert Professor Edward Feigenbaum, addressed to Rich Steinhauser, gives the latter directions to Stanford's heuristic programming project, arresting Steinhauser as a member of the AI Steering Committee. A list of attendees at a contractor conference around that time, sponsored by the Pentagon's Office of Naval Research, includes Steinhauser as a delegate under the designation OPNAV, Op 115, which refers to the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations Program on Operational Readiness, which played a major role in advancing digital systems for the military. From the 1970s, Professor Feigenbaum and his colleagues had been running Stanford's heuristic programming project under contract with DARPA, continuing through the 1990s. Feigenbaum alone had received around over $7 million in this period for his work from DARPA, along with other funding from the NSF, NASA, and ONR. Bring's supervisor at Stanford, Professor Jeffrey Ullman, was in 1996 part of a joint funding project of DARPA's Intelligent Integration of Information program. That year, Ullman co-chaired DARPA-sponsored meetings on a data exchange between multiple systems. In September 1998, the same month that Sergey Brin briefed U.S. intelligence representative Steinhauser and Thuraisingham tech entrepreneurs Andreas Bechtolshem and David Cheretron invested $100,000 each in Google. Both investors were connected to DARPA. As a Stanford PhD student in electrical engineering in the 1980s, Bechtolshem's pioneering Sun Workstation project had been funded by DARPA and the Stanford Computer Science Department. This research was the foundation of Bechtolshem's establishment of Sun Microsystems, which he co-founded with William Joy. As for Bechtolshem's co-investor in Google, David Cheriton, the latter is a longtime Stanford computer science professor who has an even more entrenched relationship with DARPA. His bio at the University of Alberta, which in November 2014 awarded him an honorary science doctorate, says that Cheriton's research has received the support of the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency for over 20 years. In the meantime, Bechtolshem left Sun Microsystems in 1995. co-founding Granite Systems with his fellow Google investor Cheriton as a partner. They sold Granite to Cisco Systems in '96, retaining significant ownership of Granite and becoming senior Cisco executives. An email obtained from the Enron Corp., a database of 600,000 emails acquired by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and later released to the public, from Richard O'Neill, inviting Enron executives to participate in the Highlands Forum, shows that Cisco and Granite executives are intimately connected to the Pentagon. The emails reveal that in May 2000, Bechtolshem's partner and Sun Microsystems co-founder William Joy, who was then chief scientist and corporate executive officer there, had attended the forum to discuss nanotechnology and molecular computing. In 1999, Joy also co-chaired the President's Information Technology Advisory Committee, overseeing a report acknowledging that DARPA had revised its priorities in the 90s so that all information technology funding was judged in terms of its benefit to the warfighter. Throughout the 90s, then, DARPA's funding to Stanford, including Google, was explicitly about developing technologies that could augment the Pentagon's military intelligence operation in war theaters. The Joy Report recommended more federal government funding from the Pentagon, NASA, and other agencies to the IT sector. Greg Papadopoulos, another of Bechtolshem's colleagues as then Sun Microsystems Chief Technology Officer, also attended a Pentagon Highlands Forum meeting in September 2000. In November, the Pentagon Highlands Forum hosted Sue Bostrom, who was vice president for the Internet at Cisco, sitting on the company's board alongside Google's co-investors Bechtolshem and Cheriton. The forum also hosted Lawrence Zurif, then a managing partner of Granite, which Bechtolshem and Cheriton had sold to Cisco. Zurif had previously been an SAIC contractor from 1993 to 1994, working with the Pentagon on national security issues, specifically for Marshall's Office of Net Assessment. In 1994, both the SAIC and the ONA were, of course, involved in co-establishing the Pentagon Highlands Forum. Among Zurif's output during his SAIC tenure was a paper titled Understanding Information War, delivered at an SAIC-sponsored U.S. Army roundtable on the revolution in military affairs. After Google's incorporation, the company received $25 million in equity funding in 1999, led by Sequoia Capital and Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers. According to Homeland Security Today, a number of Sequoia bankrolled startups have contracted with the Department of Defense, especially after 9/11, when Sequoia's Mark Kavam met with the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld to discuss the application of emerging technologies to warfighting and intelligence collection. Similarly, Kleiner Perkins had developed a close relationship with In-Q-Tel, the CIA venture capitalist firm that funds startups to advance priority technologies of value to the intelligence community. John Doerr, who led the Kleiner Perkins investment in Google obtaining a board position, was a major early investor in Bechtolshen's Sun Microsystems at its launch. He and his wife Anne are the main funders behind Rice University's Center for Engineering Leadership, which, in 2009, received $16 million from DARPA for its platform-aware compilation environment, ubiquitous computing R&D program. Doerr also had a close relationship with the Obama administration, which he advised shortly after it took power to ramp up Pentagon funding to the tech industry. In 2013, at the Fortune Brainstorm Tech Conference, Doerr applauded how the DoD's DARPA-funded GPS, CAD, most of the major computer science departments, and of course, the Internet. From inception, in other words, Google was incubated, nurtured, and financed by interests that were directly affiliated or closely aligned with the United States military intelligence community, many of whom were embedded in the Pentagon's Highland Forum. Google captures the Pentagon. In 2003, Google began customizing its search engine under special contract with the CIA for its Intel Link Management Office, overseeing top secret, secret, and sensitive but unclassified intranets for CIA and other IC agencies, according to Homeland Security Today. That year, CIA funding was also being quietly funneled through the National Science Foundation to projects that might help create new capabilities to combat terrorism through advanced technology. That following year, Google bought the firm Keyhole, which had originally been funded by In-Q-Tel. Using Keyhole, Google began developing the advanced satellite mapping software behind Google Earth. Former DARPA director and Highlands Forum co-chair Anita Jones had been on the board of In-Q-Tel at this time and remains so today. Then, in November 2005, In-Q-Tel issued notices to sell $2.2 million of Google stocks. Google's relationship with the U.S. intelligence was further brought into light when an IT contractor told a closed Washington, D.C. conference of intelligence professionals on a not-for-attribution basis that at least one U.S. intelligence agency was working to leverage Google's user data monitoring capability as part of an effort to acquire data of national security intelligence interest. A photo on Flickr, dated March 2007, reveals that Google Research Director and AI expert Peter Norvig attended a Pentagon Highlands Forum meeting that year in Carmel, California. Norvig's intimate connection to the forum as of that year is also corroborated by his role in guest editing the 2007 forum reading list. The photo shows Norvig in conversation with Louis Shepard, who at that time was Senior Technology Officer at the Defense Intelligence Agency, responsible for investigating, approving, and architecting all new hardware and software systems and acquisitions for the global defense intelligence IT enterprise, including big data technologies. Shepard now works at Microsoft. Norvig was a computer research scientist at Stanford University in 1991, before joining Bechtolshem's Sun Microsystems as senior scientist until 1994, and going on to head up NASA's Computer Science Division. Norvig shows up on O'Neill's Google Plus profile as one of his close connections. Scoping the rest of O'Neill's Google Plus connection illustrates that he is directly connected, not just to a wide range of Google executives, but also to some of the biggest names in the U.S. tech community. Those connections include Michelle Wislander-Quaid, an ex-CIA contractor and former senior Pentagon intelligence official, who is now Google's Chief Technology Officer, where she is developing programs to best fit government agencies' need. Elizabeth Churchill, Google Director of User Experience. James Kuffner, a humanoid robotics expert who now heads up Google's robotics division, and who introduced the term cloud robotics. Mark Draper, Director of Innovation Engagement for Microsoft's public sector business. Lily Chang, General Manager of Microsoft's Future Social Experiences, Fuse Labs. John Udell, Microsoft's Evangelist. Corey Undreja, Vice President of Engineering at Facebook, to name just a few. In 2010, Google signed a multi-billion-dollar no-bid contract with the NSA's sister agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The contract was to use Google Earth for visualization services for the NGA. Google had developed the software behind Google Earth by purchasing Keyhole from the CIA venture firm In-Q-Tel. Then, a year after, in 2011, another of O'Neill's Google Plus connections, Michelle Quaid, who had served in executive positions at the NGA, National Reconnaissance Office, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, left her governmental role to become Google Innovation Evangelist and the point person for seeking government contracts. Quaid's last role before her move to Google was as a senior representative to the Director of National Intelligence, to the Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Task Force, and a senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence's Director of Joint Coalition Warfighter Support. Both roles involved information operations at their core. Before her Google move, in other words, Quaid worked closely with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, to which the Pentagon's Highland Forum is subordinate. Quaid herself attended the forum, though precisely when and how, often I could not confirm. In March 2012, when DARPA Director Regina Dugan, who in that capacity was also co-chair of the Pentagon Highlands Forum, followed her colleague Quaid into Google to lead the company's new advanced technology and projects group. During her Pentagon tenure, Dugan led on strategic cybersecurity and social media, among other initiatives. She was responsible for focusing an increasing portion of DARPA's work on the investigation of offensive capabilities to address military-specific needs, securing $500 million of government funding for DARPA cyber research from 2012 to 2017. By November 2014, Google's chief AI and robotics expert James Kuffner was a delegate alongside O'Neill at the Highland Islands Forum 2014 in Singapore to explore advancement in robotics and artificial intelligence, implication for society, security, and conflict. The event included 26 delegates from Austria, Israel, Japan, Singapore, Sweden, Britain, and the United States, from both industry and government. Kuffner's association with the Pentagon, however, began much earlier. In 1997, Kuffner was a researcher during his Stanford PhD for a Pentagon-funded project on networked autonomous mobile robots, sponsored by DARPA and the United States Navy. Rumsfeld and persistent surveillance. In sum, many of Google's most senior executives are affiliated with the Pentagon Highlands Forum, which throughout the period of Google's growth over the last decade has surfaced repeatedly as a connecting and convening force. The United States intelligence community's incubation of Google from inception occurred through a combination of direct sponsorship and informal networks of financial influence, themselves closely aligned with Pentagon interests. The Highlands Forum itself has used the informal relationship building of such private networks to bring together defense and industry sectors, enabling the fusion of corporate and military interests in expanding the covert surveillance apparatus in the name of national security. The power wielded by the shadow network represented in the forum can, however, be gauged most clearly from its impact during the Bush administration, when it played a direct role in literally writing the strategies and doctrines behind U.S. efforts to achieve information superiority. In December 2001, O'Neill confirmed that strategic discussions at the Highlands Forum were feeding directly into Andrew Marshall's DoD-wide strategic review, ordered by President Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, to upgrade the military, including the Quadrennial Defense Review, and that some of the earliest forum meetings resulted in the writing of a group of DoD policies, strategies, and doctrine for the services on information warfare. That process of writing the Pentagon's information warfare policies was done in conjunction with people who understood the environment differently, not only U.S. citizens, but also foreign citizens and people who were developing corporate IT. The Pentagon's post-9/11 information warfare doctrines were, then, written not just by national security officials from the U.S. and abroad, but also by powerful corporate entities in the defense and technology sectors. In April that year, General James McCarthy had completed his defense transformation review ordered by Rumsfeld. His report repeatedly highlighted mass surveillance as integral to DoD transformation. As for Marshall, his follow-up report for Rumsfeld was going to develop a blueprint determining the Pentagon's future in the information age. O'Neill also affirmed that to develop information warfare doctrine, the forum had held extensive discussions on electronic surveillance and what constitutes an act of war in an information environment. Papers feeding into U.S. defense policy written through the late 1990s by RAND consultants John Arkilla and David Ronfelt, both long-standing Highland Forum members, were produced as a result of those meetings, exploring policy dilemmas on how far to take the goal of information superiority. One of the things that was shocking to the American public was that we weren't pilfering Milosevic's accounts electronically when in fact we could, commented O'Neill. Although the R&D process around the Pentagon transformation strategy remains classified, a hint at the DoD discussions going on in this period can be gleaned from a 2005 U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies research monograph in the DoD journal, Military Review, authored by an active Army intelligence officer. The idea of persistent surveillance as a transformational capability has circulated within the national intelligence community and the Department of Defense for at least 3 years, the paper said, referencing the Rumsfeld-commissioned transformation study. The Army paper went on to review a range of high-level official military documents, including one from the Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, showing that persistent surveillance was a fundamental theme of the information-centric vision for defense policy across the Pentagon. We now know that just 2 months before O'Neill's address at Harvard in 2001 under the TIA program, President Bush had secretly authorized the NSA's domestic surveillance of Americans without court-approved warrants, in what appears to have been an illegal modification of the thin thread data mining project, as later exposed by NSA whistleblowers William Binney and Thomas Drake. The surveillance startup Nexus. From here on, Highlands Forum partner SAIC played a key role in the NSA rollout from inception. Shortly after 9/11, Brian Sharkley, Chief Technology Officer of SAIC's ELS3 sector, focusing on IT systems for emergency responders, teamed up with John Poindexter to propose the TIA surveillance program. SAIC's Sharkley had previously been Deputy Director of the Information Systems Office at DARPA through the 1990s. Meanwhile, around the same time, SAIC Vice President for Corporate Development, Samuel Vissner, became head of the NSA's Signals Intelligence Programs. SAIC was then among a consortium receiving a $280 million contract to develop one of the NSA's secret eavesdropping systems. By 2003, Vissner returned to SAIC to become Director of Strategic Planning and Business Development of the firm's intelligence groups. That year, the NSA consolidated its TIA program of warrantless electronic surveillance to keep track of individuals and understand how they fit into models through risk profiles of American citizens and foreigners. TIA was doing this by integrating databases on financial, travel, medical, educational, and other records into a virtual, centralized, grand database. This is also the year that the Bush administration drew up its notorious Information Operations Roadmap, describing the Internet as a vulnerable weapons system. Rumsfeld's I.O. roadmap had advocated that the Pentagon strategy should be based on the premise that the Department of Defense will fight the net as it would an enemy weapons system. The U.S. should seek maximum control of the full spectrum of global emerging communication systems, sensors, and weapons systems, advocated the document. The following year, John Poindexter, who had proposed and run the TIA surveillance program via his post at DARPA, was in Singapore, participating in the Highlands 2004 Island Forum. Other delegates included then Highlands Forum co-chair and Pentagon CIO Linton Wells, president of notorious Pentagon information warfare contractor John Rendon, Carl Lowe, director of the Joint Forces Command, Joint Advanced Warfighting Division, Air Vice Marshal Stephen Dalton, Capability Manager for Information Superiority at the UK Ministry of Defence, Lieutenant General Johan Kill, Swedish Army Supreme Commander HQ Chief of Staff, among others. As of 2006, SAIC had been awarded a multi-million-dollar NSA contract to develop a big data mining project called Execute Locus, despite the colossal $1 billion failure of its preceding contract, known as Trailblazer. Core components of TIA were being quietly continued under new code names, according to Foreign Policy's Shane Harris, but had been concealed behind the veil of the classified intelligence budget. The new surveillance program had by then been fully transitioned from DARPA's jurisdiction to the NSA. This was also the year of yet another Singapore Island Forum, led by Richard O'Neill on behalf of the Pentagon, which included senior defense and industry officials from the US, UK, Australia, France, India, and Israel. Participants also included senior technologists from Microsoft, IBM, as well as Gilman Louis, partner of technology investment firm Alsop Louis Partners. Gilman Louis is a former CEO of In-Q-Tel, the CIA firm investing especially in startups developing data mining technology. In-Q-Tel was founded in 1999 by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology, under which the Office of Research and Development, which was part of the Google-funded MDSS program, had operated. The idea was to essentially replace the functions once performed by the ORD by mobilizing the private sector to develop information technology solutions for the entire intelligence community. Louis had led In-Q-Tel from 1999 until January 2006, including when Google bought Keyhole, the In-Q-Tel funded satellite mapping software. Among his colleagues on In-Q-Tel's board in this period were former DARPA director and Highlands Forum co-chair Anita Jones, who is still there, as well as founding board member William Perry, the man who had appointed O'Neill to set up the Highlands Forum in the first place. Joining Perry as a founding In-Q-Tel board member was John Seeley Brown, then chief scientist at Xerox Corp and director of its Palo Alto Research Center from 1990 to 2002, who is also a longtime senior Highlands Forum member since inception. In addition to the CIA, In-Q-Tel has also been backed by the FBI, NGA, and Defense Intelligence Agency, among other agencies. More than 60% of In-Q-Tel's investments under Louis' watch were in companies that specialize in automatically collecting, sifting through, and understanding oceans of information, according to Medill's School of Journalism, News 21, which also noted that Louis himself had acknowledged it was not clear whether privacy and civil liberties will be protected by government's use of these technologies for national security. The transcript of Richard O'Neill's late 2001 seminar at Harvard shows that the Pentagon Highlands Forum had first engaged Gilman Louis long before the Island Forum. In fact, shortly after 9/11, to explore what's going on in In-Q-Tel. That forum session focused on how to take advantage of the speed of the commercial market that wasn't present inside the science and technology community of Washington, and to understand the implications for the DoD in terms of the strategic review, the QDR, Hill Action, and the stakeholders. Participants of the meeting included senior military people, combatant commanders, several of the senior flag officers, and some defense industry people, and various U.S. representatives, including Republican Congressman William Mack Thornberry and Democratic Senator Joseph Lieberman. Both Thornberry and Lieberman are staunch supporters of NSA surveillance and have consistently acted to rally support for pro-war, pro-surveillance legislation. O'Neill's comments indicate that the forum's role is not just to enable corporate contractors to write Pentagon policy, but to rally political support for governmental policies adopted through the forum's informal brand of shadow networking. Repeatedly, O'Neill told his Harvard audience that his job as forum president was to scope case studies from real companies across the private sector, like eBay and Human Genome Sciences, to figure out the basis of U.S. information superiority, how to dominate the information market, and leverage this for what the President and the Secretary of Defense wanted to do with regard to transformation of the DoD and the Strategic Review. By 2007, a year after the Island Forum meeting that included Gilman-Louis, Facebook received its second round of $12.7 million worth of funding from Accel Partners. Accel was headed up by James Breyer, former chair of the National Venture Capital Association, where Louis also served on the board while still CEO of In-Q-Tel. Both Louis and Breyer had previously served together on the board of BBN Technologies, which had recruited ex-DARPA chief and In-Q-Tel trustee Anita Jones. Facebook's 2008 round of funding was led by Greylock Venture Capital, which invested $27.5 million. The firm's senior partners include Howard Cox, another former NVCA chair, who also sits on the board of In-Q-Tel. Apart from Breyer and Zuckerberg, Facebook's only other board member is Peter Thiel, co-founder of defense contractor Palantir, which provides all sorts of data mining and visualization technologies to the United States government, military and intelligence agencies, including the NSA and FBI, and which itself was nurtured to financial viability by Highland Forum members. Palantir co-founders Thiel and Alex Karp met with John Poindexter in 2004, according to Wired. The same year Poindexter had attended the Highlands Island Forum in Singapore. They met at the home of Richard Pearl, another Andrew Marshall acolyte. Poindexter helped Palantir open doors and to assemble a legion of advocates from the most influential strata of government. Thiel had also met with Gilman-Louis of In-Q-Tel, securing the backing of the CIA in this early phase. And so we come full circle. Data mining programs like Execute Locus and projects linked to it, which were developed throughout this period, apparently laid the groundwork for the new NSA programs eventually disclosed by Edward Snowden. By 2008, as Facebook received its next fundraising round from Greylock Venture Capital, documents and whistleblower testimony confirmed that the NSA was effectively resurrecting the TIA project with a focus on internet data mining via comprehensive monitoring of email, text messages, and web browsing. We also now know, thanks to Snowden, that the NSA's X-Keyscore digital network intelligence exploitation system was designed to allow analysts to search not just internet databases like emails, online chats, and browsing history, but also telephone services, mobile phone audio, financial transactions, and global air transport communications, essentially the entire global telecommunications grid. Highlands Forum partner SAIC played a key role, among other contractors, in producing and administering the NSA's X-Keyscore, and was recently implicated in NSA hacking of the privacy network Tor. The Pentagon Highlands Forum was therefore intimately involved in all this as a convening network, but also quite directly, confirming his pivotal role in the expansion of the US-led global surveillance apparatus. Then Forum co-chair, Pentagon CIO Linton Wells, told FedTech magazine in 2009 that he had overseen the NSA's rollout of an impressive long-term architecture last summer that will provide increasingly sophisticated security until 2015 or so. The Goldman Sachs connection. When I asked Wells about the forum's role in influencing U.S. mass surveillance, he responded only to say he would prefer not to comment, and that he no longer leads the group. As Wells is no longer in government, this is to be expected, but he is still connected to Highlands. As of September 2014, after delivering his influential white paper on Pentagon transformation, he joined the Monterey Institute for International Studies Cybersecurity Initiative as a distinguished senior fellow. Sadly, this was not a form of trying to keep busy in retirement. Wells' move underscored that the Pentagon's conception of information warfare is not just about surveillance, but about the exploitation of surveillance to influence both government and public opinion. The MIIS SciSec initiative is now formally partnered with the Pentagon Highlands Forum through a Memorandum of Understanding signed with MIIS Provost Dr. Amy Sands, who sits on the Secretary of State's International Security Advisory Board. The MIIS SciSec website states that the MOU signed with Richard O'Neill paves the way for future joint MIIS SciSec Highlands Group sessions that will explore the impact of technology on security, peace, and information engagement. For nearly 20 years, the Highlands Group has engaged private sector and government leaders, including the Director of National Intelligence, DARPA, Office of the Secretary of Defense, Office of the Secretary of Homeland Security, and the Singaporean Ministry of Defense, in creative conversations to frame policy and technology research areas. Who is the financial benefactor of the new Pentagon Highlands partnered MIIS SciSec initiative? According to the MIIS SciSec site, the initiative was launched through a generous donation of seed funding from George Lee. George C. Lee is a senior partner at Goldman Sachs, where he is Chief Information Officer of the Investment Banking Division and Chairman of the Global Technology, Media, and Telecom Group. But here's the kicker. In 2011, it was Lee who engineered Facebook's $50 billion valuation, and previously handled deals for other Highlands-connected tech giants like Google, Microsoft, and eBay. Lee's then boss, Stephen Friedman, a former CEO and chairman of Goldman Sachs, and later senior partner of the firm's executive board, was also a founding board member of In-Q-Tel alongside Highlands Forum overlord William Perry and forum member John Seely Brown. In 2001, Bush appointed Stephen Friedman to the Presidential Intelligence Advisory Board, and then to chair that board from 2005 to 2009. Friedman previously served alongside Paul Wolfowitz and others on the 1995 to 1996 Presidential Commission of Inquiry into U.S. intelligence capabilities, and in 1996 on the Jeremiah Panel that produced a report to the Director of National Reconnaissance Office, one of the surveillance agencies plugged into the Highlands Forum. Friedman was on the Jeremiah Panel with Martin Faga, then Senior Vice President and General Manager of METER, Corp's Center for Integrated Intelligence Systems, where Thurasingham, who managed the CIA NSA MDDS program that inspired DARPA counter and terrorist data mining, was also a lead engineer. In the footnotes to a chapter for the book, Cyberspace and National Security, Georgetown University Press, SAIC Leidos executive Jeff Cooper reveals that another Goldman Sachs senior partner, Philip J. Venables, who as Chief Information Risk Officer leads the firm's programs on information security, delivered a Highlands Forum presentation in 2008 at what was called an enrichment session on deterrence. Cooper's chapter draws on Venerable presentation at Highlands with permission. In 2010, Venables participated with his then-boss Friedman at an Aspen Institute meeting on the world economy. For the last few years, Venables has also sat on various NSA cybersecurity award review boards. In sum, the investment firm responsible for creating the billion-dollar fortunes of the tech sensations of the 21st century, from Google to Facebook, is intimately linked to the United States military intelligence community, with Venables, Lee, and Friedman either directly connected to the Pentagon Highlands Forum or to senior members of the forum. Fighting terror with terror. The convergence of these powerful financial and military interests around the Highlands Forum through George Lee's sponsorship of the forum's new partner, the MIIS SciSec initiative, is revealing in itself. MIIS SciSec director, Dr. Itamara Lockhart, has long been embedded in Highlands. She regularly presents current research on non-state groups, governance, technology, and conflict to the U.S. Office of the Secretary of Defense Highlands Forum. According to her Tufts University bio, she also regularly advises U.S. combatant commandeers and specializes in studying the use of information technology by violent and nonviolent sub-state groups. Dr. Lockhart maintains a comprehensive database of 1,700 non-state groups, including insurgents, militias, terrorists, complex criminal organizations, organized gangs, malicious cyber actors, and strategic nonviolent actors. That would be me, strategic nonviolent actor, to analyze their organizational patterns, areas of cooperation, strategies, and tactics. Notice here the mention of strategic nonviolent actors, which perhaps covers NGOs and other groups or organizations engaged in social political activity or campaigning, judging by the focus of other DoD research programs. As of 2008, Lockhart has been an adjunct professor at the U.S. Joint Special Operations University, where she teaches a top-secret advanced course in irregular warfare, where she designed for senior U.S. Special Forces officers. She has previously taught courses on internal war for senior political military officers of various Gulf regimes. Her views thus disclose much about what the Highlands Forum has been advocating all these years. In 2004, Lockhart was co-author of a study for the U.S. Air Force's Institute for National Security Studies on U.S. strategy towards non-state armed groups. The study, on the one hand, argued that non-state armed groups should be urgently recognized as a Tier 1 security priority, and on the other, that the proliferation of armed groups provides strategic opportunities that can be exploited to help achieve policy goals. There have and will be instances where the United States may find collaborating with armed groups is in its strategic interests, but sophisticated tools must be developed to differentiate between different groups and understand their dynamics, to determine which groups should be countered and which should be exploited for U.S. interests. Armed groups' profiles can likewise be employed to identify ways in which the United States may assist certain armed groups whose success will be advantageous to U.S. foreign policy objectives. In 2008, WikiLeaks published a leaked restricted U.S. Army Special Operations Field Manual, which demonstrated that the sort of thinking advocated by the likes of Highland experts Lockhart had been explicitly adopted by U.S. Special Forces. Lockhart's work thus demonstrates that the Highlands Forum sat at the intersection of advanced Pentagon strategy on surveillance, covert operations, and irregular warfare, mobilizing mass surveillance to develop detailed information on violent and nonviolent groups perceived as potentially threatening to U.S. interests or offering opportunities for exploitation, thus feeding directly into U.S. covert operations. That, ultimately, is why the CIA, the NSA, the Pentagon spawned Google, so they could run their secret dirty wars with even greater efficiency than ever before. I feel like I just took a walk through like the dark fascist heart just there. I did not think that that was going to take as long as that took. But boy, howdy, am I glad that I just read that. That's only part 1 of 2. And I got to tell you, very illuminating. Lots of huge... This is a huge report. This is a massive, huge report. Like, this is big. Like, this is a massive and huge, gigantic... Like, it's one of those things where it's like... we always speculated. You know what I mean? Like, I'm always like speculating. We know that these organizations exist. We know, but this guy basically was just like, yeah, here it is. Here's how it worked. Here's how it got set up. Here's the process of it. Here are some of the key players. Sounds really fascist. Sounds super, super fascist. Literally a merger of public and private interests to conspire against the public. Right? Like, that's what this is. Right? Anybody want to refute that idea? Anybody out there want to be like, no, John, this is legitimate. This is a legitimate thing that we should definitely let the ruling class do. Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world that they should have every single scrap of data about us constantly so that they can always make a case against anybody they want. That's a normal thing. It's normal. Just me, this article comes from the Discord, so it's already in the Discord. But yeah, and good evening to you, Dragonfruit, and that guy. You came into the middle of that nonsense. This is part 1 of 2. I'm not going to read part 2 right now. Perhaps later in the future. Because it's probably as big, right? Yeah, it's like another one of those. I'm going to read the conclusion, though. I'm going to read the conclusion. Here, hold on. Here we go. I'm going to read last 3 paragraphs. What are the lessons of this irony? Simple, really. The information revolution is inherently decentralized and decentralizing. It cannot be controlled and co-opted by Big Brother. Efforts to do so will, in the end, invariably fail, in a way that is ultimately self-defeating. The latest madcap Pentagon initiative to dominate the world through control of information and information technologies is not a sign of the all-powerful nature of the shadow network, but rather a symptom of its deluded desperation as it attempts to ward off the acceleration of its hegemonic decline. But the decline is well on its way, and this story, like so many before it, is one small sign that the opportunities to mobilize the information revolution for the benefit of all, despite the efforts of power to hide in the shadows, are stronger than ever. Cool. You guys have been commenting over on Twitch as well. Good to see you, Captain. A fellow saying that's conspiracies. USA can't make Google because the US government respects the private business, and Google's a product of the capitalist innovation and individual freedom. That's right. That's how Google got made. It was a bunch of guys working in their basement with a dream. They didn't get CIA funding. They weren't supported by gigantic, enormous... It's certainly not a bunch of like fascists coming together thinking, how do we oppress the people that we are supposed to be governing for our own benefit, right? That's not how fascists would think. No, never in the history of mankind would any fascists ever do this thing that the fascists are obviously doing. Like, we're on this interesting precipice because Trump's probably going to win the next election again. And that's like a bridge too far for the liberal mind. But like, we're already fascist. Like, we're already there. Like, are you kidding me? Please explain to me all of the freedom that you're experiencing. Right? Please. Well, but specifically, it's not simply that fascists like the state. It's that fascists see the state as a way to exert class control and class dominance. That's why Mussolini said that fascism is better called corporatism, because it's a merger of the state and business. That business uses the state in order to protect its own interests, right? fascists believe the state should account for social welfare? I don't understand what you're saying with that. Like, I don't think fascists really believe in state welfare. Kevin O'Leary wants to buy TikTok? Sure. Why not? Why don't we listen to this completely unserious boob who made his money committing fraud against Mattel? Sure. Hey, Day, do you want to just state your point? I don't understand what you mean. Yeah, we aren't allowed to discuss vaccines and COVID. We can't talk about allies doing war crimes. Yeah, we can't talk about anything interesting. We can't talk about nothing anymore. Like, like it's just gotten to be like boobery, right? And in the meantime, like, because I do think they're losing control of a lot of this stuff. Right? Somebody straight up asked Biden, who will guard the port that the United States will build in Gaza to receive aid? And his response was, the Israelis. Which is cute. But, like, it should be really clear to anybody at this point that the reason why they're cleansing Gaza is for all the oil and gas that's underneath it. Like, this is a report from 2021. So before the conflict. A recent study by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development points out that new discoveries of natural gas in the Levant Basin are in the range of 122 trillion cubic feet, while recoverable oil is estimated at 1.7 billion barrels. These reserves offer an opportunity to distribute and share about $524 billion among the different parties in the region. So, why are they building a port there? So that they can begin construction on this project. That's what they're doing. They're not building a port there for Gaza aid. This is one of the most bewildering, like, if you actually believe that they're building a port there to bring aid into Gaza, you are a very dumb person. Like, and you should be told that you're a dumb person. They are obviously putting a port there so that they can begin extracting oil and gas from Gaza. This is how they plan on fueling the next iteration and the next era of warmongering in the region. This is how they plan on continuing fighting in the Middle East. This is how they plan on continuing their war agenda. Day writes, in a capitalist point of view, in capitalism, freedom and property ownership is the model. I mean, that's the narrative. Like, that's the religious ideology, certainly. What we had is the fascist experience went against these things, so we shouldn't account for, as they had continuously used the state to spread and control the economy. Yeah, like, the religious ideology that you call capitalism espouses this religious ideology that capitalism is about freedom and property ownership, right? It wants you to believe that that's what capitalism is all about, even though there's literally no evidence to suggest that that's the case. That capitalism has always had a fairly controlled economy. It's just that economy is not controlled by you, right? The economy is very clearly controlled by heavy interests. Fascists don't like freedom and property ownership. They love it for them. Like, this seems to be what, like, I think that what's missing from your analysis. I think what's missing from your analysis is the reality of the class dynamic that exists in the society. That there are two primary classes that exist in capitalist societies. Just how in feudal societies there were serfs and there were lords, in capitalism there are owners and there are workers, right? What Marx would call the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, right? There are workers, there is a working class, There are people who own nothing except their labor. Maybe they own their house, right? Like maybe they own a car. But for the most part, all they have to sell and all they have to get access to food and shelter is the sale of their labor. And who are they selling their labor to? They're selling it to the bourgeoisie, to the owners of the means of production, to the owners of production, to factory owners, to people who have the ability to produce things. And that pretty embarrassing statement to say that fascists aren't on the owner's side. Fascists are 100% on the side of the ownership class. 100%, and it's embarrassing to make any other claim. That fascism is the cudgel of capitalism. That so long as you're willing to be complacent, so long as you're willing to eat your slop, right? As long as you're willing to accept what it is the capitalists are doing silently and quietly, then they're happy to go along with a free market system of free market capital. But when the serfs get uppity, when the workers get uppity and actually start demanding labor rights and actually start demanding some of that promised freedom that capitalism claimed to want to deliver, even though there's no evidence that they're interested in it at all, then they lean on, then they begin to exert fascist control. Then they begin to give big bailouts and big handouts to their corporate buddies. Fascists care too much about the people. So this is like some fascist apologetics we're getting now. So do you think they really cared about the Jews when they did the Holocaust? How about the Romani or the communists when they round them up and put them in concentration camps? Do you really think they cared a lot about the people when they were exterminating them in large numbers? How about when they invaded France? World War II, right? They killed 25 million Russians, right? Yeah. Hitler had some crazy ideas about race. Yeah, I think you're right, Oddity. Good call. We're just going to go ahead and ban the fascist apologist. No fascist or Nazi apologism in the chat. We don't respect it at all. We hope something bad happens to you and that you have a come to Jesus moment, you come to the light. We're not interested in talking to fascist apologists. You are a fascist apologist. I hope something bad happens to fascist apologists. Goodbye. Yeah, you're forgetting how fascists define people, yeah. No, I mean, this kind of fascist apologetics, this idea that fascists are actually interested in helping, they're interested in helping themselves. That's what they're interested in. That they define people as themselves and people they like, right? And to describe wow, yeah, Hitler had some crazy ideas about race. It's no, that's what fascists do. That's some pretty basic fascist kind of ideology and fascist thinking. The idea that Mussolini did not also have fascist ideas or fascist rhetoric. Did Hitler maybe take it into the next degree? Sure, but it was obviously very popular, right? It wasn't just him. That's the part about these loser apologists, is that they want to pretend like it's just, it was just Hitler. No, Hitler was very popular. People really liked him. He had a lot of support. The people who committed the Holocaust and the people who were rounding people up and putting them in the concentration camps weren't going, oh dear, we've got to do what we got to do, or else they were in support of what was happening, right? That they wanted to do it, or at the very least they were well, this is what we're doing, and they didn't give a shit. So this fascist apologism, anytime it floats in here, I'm just it just reminds me how we're a failed people in a failed society. We keep reaching for these failed ideologies while pretending the systems that actually have worked in the past don't, right? That's what's embarrassing about these fascists, is that they're losers to an individual, right? There's no such thing as a fascist that has ever won a single thing. Fascists lose every single war they've ever fought. They achieve almost nothing, while constantly failing. And we're all supposed to be like, these are good ideas. Hitler just did it wrong. Get the fuck out of here. I hope something bad happens to you. Yep. South America, every government destabilized. Cooperative entities. I mean, like, once you understand that, like, the distinction between neoliberalism and fascism is, like, almost non-existent. Like, it's just a rebranding. Like, economically, neoliberalism and fascism are very much hand in hand, which is this concept of, like, trickle down economics, right? Let's empower the rich industrial capitalists. Let's empower finance capital. Let's merge the corporate sector with the business sector, and that'll all trickle down and be good somehow. Like, it's pretty basic, like, one-to-one fascism. That's how fascism operates, right? We're going to privatize everything. We're going to give everything into the private sector. But of course, if something goes wrong in the private sector, then we'll bail them out. And who's the one that's responsible for bailing them out? Oh, it's you, right? So this nonsense, like, this fucking, there's too many fucking losers in the conversation right now. Like, it's amazing how we have actually, like, doubled down on being total fucking losers, and, like, how we're trying to rehabilitate the total losers of history, and we're trying to rehabilitate the ideologies of the complete and total losers of history. Like, it's just embarrassing, and we love it. We just love we love constantly being losers and constantly failing. And we just think it's the best. It's just amazing. Just amazing to see how often losers come in here and try to spread their loser shit around. Meanwhile, major U.S. corporations threaten to return labor to the law of the jungle. I think we're going to end with this. Upset by the surge in union drives, several of the best-known corporations in the U.S. are seeking to cripple the country's top labor watchdog, the National Labor Relations Board, by having it declared unconstitutional. Some labor experts warn that if those efforts succeed, U.S. labor relations might return to the law of the jungle. In recent weeks, Elon Musk's SpaceX, as well as Amazon's Starbucks and Trader Joe's, have filed legal papers that advance novel arguments aimed at hobbling and perhaps shutting down the NLRB, the federal agency that enforces labor rights and oversees unionization efforts. Those companies are eager to thwart the NLRB after it accused Amazon, Starbucks, and Trader Joe's of breaking the law in battling against unionization, and accused SpaceX of illegally firing 8 workers for criticizing Musk. Roger King, a longtime management side lawyer who is senior labor counsel for the HR Policy Association, said, "It will be a lose-lose. If the federal courts overturn the 89-year-old National Labor Relations Act, which has governed labor relations since Franklin Roosevelt was president, we'll have the law of the jungle, the law of the street," King said. "It will be who has the most power, its potential for chaos." Kate Andreas, a Columbia University law professor, said workers would be hurt if the courts issue a sweeping decision that declares both the NLRB and National Labor Relations Act unconstitutional. "Without them, workers will be even worse off," she said. "It's critical that they continue to exist to protect the basic rights and organization and engage in collective bargaining. This is an assault on rights we have considered fundamental since the New Deal. Some worker advocates have voiced surprise that these companies are seeking to hobble the NLRB when, in their view, the labor board is already too weak, its penalties toothless." Yeah, but these people are psychos. They want everything. They want it all. The NLRB can't fine companies even $1 for breaking the law, for instance, by illegally firing workers for supporting a union. SpaceX, Starbucks, Amazon, and Trader Joe's have put forward 3 main arguments for holding the NLRB unconstitutional. It penalizes companies without a jury trial, exercises executive powers without the president being free to remove board officials, and violates the separation of powers by exercising executive, legislative, and judicial functions. This corporate attack is part of a wave of lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of various federal agencies that regulate business. Just like America turning itself into a total shithole, right? That's what this is. Adrius said one factor spurring the challenges to the NLRB is that the Supreme Court over the last decade, but especially in the last couple of years, has signaled a hostility to the administrative state that has radically made administrative law in a way that could curb the government's ability to protect workers and consumers. Companies are now trying to capitalize on the court's conservative majority. Another reason for these anti-NLRB efforts is that many companies believe that President Biden's NLRB has swung too far to the left. What a joke. The board is usually pro-business under Republican presidents and pro-labor under Democrat ones. What a joke. King said that SpaceX and other companies hope the courts will prove it provided a firewall against the NLRB's leftward shift. What a joke. What a joke. I'm sorry. To call any of what's happening in the United States a leftward shift is just such a fucking joke. Right? Maybe it's like a leftward, glance in a direction and, seeing a sea of people and being like, well, we need to at least lie to these people. We need to at least say something to these people. Let's pass a bill called the Hugging Puppies Bill that actually just kills puppies. That's what we're currently doing. So this is, can you imagine if this actually happens? If this actually occurs where the Supreme Court is like, yeah, this legislation's not legal, then wages are zero. Go get fucked. I don't care. That's where this goes. And the psychopaths that rule us, right? Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and the like, right? They're fine with slave labor. They're completely fine with that, which is exactly their goal here. So it's just what an insane period of time. And in the midst of this, I got people coming in here trying to defend fascism as an ideology. I hope those people find a grisly end soon. All right, guys, we've reached the end of this one. This was an odd one. I read this huge article. I'm really glad that I did. It's like a piercing into the dark heart of the system of fascism that exists in our society. But boy, howdy. All right, guys, always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Revolt, rebel, repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.